try to get into this because, like, literally, like, I'm trying to pair the camera functionality, but it seems to be doing something, not something. I can't tell. So I'm gonna just kind of like get into it. So I seen some things, right? And like I was browsing, like I didn't, I ain't bother like try to like capture everything. You know what I'm saying? So like some of it I might not find so easily. And I was looking, but not really at the same time. I was just kind of like just like scrolling, browsing, whatever, right? And so I think this just recording. I think this thing recording, right? And so um, I seen, just like even right now, right? So like I'm screen capturing and I'm just kind of like scrolling. Some of this stuff I'm kind of like subscribed to. Some of it just appears and I'm just like reminded of like let's just say like the last 7 days, right? And so like throughout the week I was even before that, like the previous week I was like looking into, all right, well, you know what I might kind of like, freestyle or just like, what I mean, like, just post, right? So I'm like going through this for like days, and I'm like, I don't really want to comment on this. So like some of it, I kind of like just like journaled, and other of it, you know what I mean. I just kind of like, you know what I mean, like uttered it to myself more or less, right? And so I was like, fuck it. In between that, I did hit the button, the record button, and I was like, I think I left like a voice memo too, right? In between some like journals. Alright, so I was scrolling and I was looking, and I wasn't necessarily looking, but I stopped over here, right? It says, why did God kill Onan, right? Now I put Onan um in a song, right? Like I kind of cover the Old Testament and Goshen, right? And so like not the complete, but like the gist of it, right? And so I mentioned um I mentioned a few biblical names, and Onan is one of them, right? And it wasn't until I think I seen that yesterday, right? I said something about 2 days ago, right? Dang. And so it's easy to get lost in the shuffle, right? And so I think it's coming up, going past it. Um, I just seen it. Hey, I just saw it with me, right? Because I stopped it. Ah, there you go. Right? So it's like, you know, I mean, why not talk about that, right? But like, even beyond that, like a greater kind of like insight, wanna I mean, like, coming across my mental dashboard, right? And so like I see this, and I think I checked out some of his content previously. Um, Either way, he has probably like hours and hours of content, and I'm not sure what his capacity is. Like, just you know, a YouTuber or actual, whatever the situation is, right? And so he's covering this topic. It's not too lengthy, and um, didn't check it out, and I probably should, but like I figure like he covered that, and you know, there's a lot of like understandings when it comes to the subject. However, he's explaining it from like a biblical Christian point of view, and um, I'm not gonna elaborate on that any further because honestly, like once I seen that, I recognized like uh, he's teaching a lesson surrounding that and owning owning for that matter. He's in the lineage of Judah, and so that's more what I wanted to focus on, right? Um, and so Onan, he was one of three sons, and I spoke about this, right? And so, um, I mean, it's a lot to cover. So like it was just like streams of consciousness, and like I didn't do like too much detail, like even just considering like his approach to it, but it wasn't more or less a kind of um like have any kind of like rebuttal or counter or just come with anything else. It's more like Onan, oh yeah, I remember. And so with Onan, um he was Judah's second son, and he had a third son, and all three of his sons, including him, had uh, uh, um, um, in many regards, like a wife, right? And it's interesting to say that because um, hold on, let me it's interesting to say that because I mean like that's what I'm saying, like he's covering the topic from a different perspective, but um I'm just considering Onan and Judah's lineage, and Judah's lineage brought forth the Messiah, right? And so we got the Passover like coming up, and like with that, like even before Christ was born, um we know that like his parents were familiar with like the Passover, and like they were familiar with like literally like like the true living God and his ways, right? And so it's a lot to like it's a lot to I don't want to say unpack, but in many regards I'm happy to say that for lack of a better word, because they would have to make this journey to Jerusalem, right? And um, just knowing that, then you're familiar with at least Jesus' early beginnings, right? When he was a child, right? And so we we find out about how his family, like they were accustomed to making the long trip, and I mean I might be mistaken, but I think it was like 3 days or so. Um, and so to think about that, like I just finished mentioning like unpack, right? So like if you're gonna like take a trip somewhere, you normally probably gonna carry certain like sufficient items, right? And so like you don't want to fall into the bad habit of like underpacking or overpacking, right? And so like if you're accustomed to making the trip, then at some point like you already got your little system, right? And so even when you got your little system, guess what? It could still be a challenge when you got a family that you gotta kind of like um coordinate, and like literally like you gotta kind of like get everybody on the same page. And so like literally like children tend to sometimes get like lost in their own world, right? And yet here Jesus is, right? He's in the temple and he's teaching, and like the scribes like like I should go to the word, right? And so Yeah, man. Let's go there. So it makes it more lengthier, and then like then like literally, then I be feeling some type of way because I haven't like produced like that short content. You know what I mean? So sometimes it be lengthy and like I just can't say like how you guys kind of like catch it right. And so like literally like I be feeling guilty because I'm like, damn, I don't want to take up like somebody's whole like, and then you know what I mean, like like just running my mouth or whatever, like somebody's like, you know, whole hour, and a lot of times I be doing the weave, so it's like it might sound like I'm talking in circles, but then we get right back to the point, right? And so um, with like with Onan and him being a part of Judah's lineage, right, which brought forth the Messiah, right? Um, this is we mentioned lineage, right? So there's like some kind of chronology to this, right? And so like this is why it's not to be redundant, but like it's like you just can't dismiss the Bible. And so yeah, you could probably you know at your best or at your worst, like you know um you know be a proponent or a distractor, but at the end of the day, like God's word remains, right? And so like that's historical and that's factual, and so like there's certain things that we just can't like outright just dismiss, and we have to at the very least consider, right? If we're even just behaving in any kind of like civil kind of way, right? And so I have to say this because a lot of times this is where disputes somewhat um you know um manifest, right? Because of the greater overall um you know and that even just breaks down to all kind of variants, right? But like literally like it all stems from different ideologies, right? And so I had mentioned, and so this, like I don't know how y'all get the content, but like at times, like I get into like somewhat, and for me, they're not even debates. You know what I mean? They could somewhat come across that way, but I wouldn't put it in that category. There's certainly conversations, and they certainly do get heated, and perspectives, right? And you know, and literally like um I guess this is where like you know a debate may arise, right? And so like in my defense, right? Like I'm always um taking into consideration, and even for lack of a better word, like the opponent, right, or the challenger's perspective in regards to like trying to break down or deconstruct my understanding. And so this is where interpretation and just like lack of knowledge could somewhat you know um, make a person susceptible to succumb to you know another person's ideology, right? And there's many ideologies, right? And so I think I had wrote about it in 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 in, in introspect. I had mentioned something of, and so just bear with me because like like my mind doesn't do this sometimes, right? And so I gotta like recall um different different compartments and departments, right, within this construct, right, or this understanding, right? And so there's societal views and the social engineering that people either willingly accept or you know challenge, right? And then that falls into the conspiracy aspect of things, right? And so there's there's this need for um existing among, I mean, in many regards, many threats, right? You know, these are like like societal. These are internal. These obviously internal, but external as well. And so I mentioned societal, right? And so your surroundings, right? And so these challenges or these opponents, right? To your understanding could allow you to fall victim to many threats, right? These could be narratives, these could be gaslighting in some form, um, and in many regards, like when I think about like source, right, and like that's for good or bad, right? I'll understand it where it's like, um, so literally like adjusting, right, to like making content, right, and so like not to compare or whatever, but like that was reasonable amount of like pretty much like duration, right? To get bite-sized information, especially like in in times of now, is certainly like um ideal in many regards, right? So like when it comes to like you know like what to offer, it's like I will really understand that people got short attention spans, right? And then like previously, like I said, in like many aspects, like a lot of times I I, I'll fall back because like I'll drop something and then I'll just see like, or I'll wait to see like how it resonates, right? And so sometimes it's not something that a person like easily grasps, and then there's other times where a person might instinctively understand it, but still have to grapple with it, right? And so within that whole spectrum, you know what I mean? It's like I let it let it just kind of like sit there whenever it's activating, whenever a person catches up to it, whenever a person um like gets to that understanding or circles back to that understanding. Like, maybe they could process something else, right? But then again, like there's also that redundant aspect, and so you know I don't mean to kind of like be repetitive and redundant, and so like I was kind of like, I well, what else do you know I want to like not necessarily like I wanted to feel like, oh well, you just want to you know talk about this transgender dysphoria stuff. Obviously, that is something that permeates into other facets and other ideologies as well. So ultimately, I'm gonna have to go back to what I said, that we all have one common enemy, right? And I've said that in various, at different time, different locations. And so, if you was present, you was present. And so it's still present, even though that was in the past. And so just a reminder, right? And so, whatever that means for you, right? Because at the end of the day, I might not necessarily be your enemy, but either way, you might consider me your enemy. And at the same time, you can't disregard that you got an enemy within your own self. And so last weekend I was tripping over at myself, right? Supposedly, not to gaslight myself, supposedly I had a temper tantrum, right? compare those little temper tantrums to like when they undermine and undermine or speak disparagingly of a narcissist, they'll compare them to little 2 year olds, right? They call them like big children, right? And like like it it appears in many forms because like a little child, like it could have like child you mostly associate with innocence, right? And so like sometimes around this stage, right, you get to see the little devil in your child, right? And so you know, like literally, like let's unpack that, right? Because we're still on task, so we're still talking about Jesus, and Jesus was a child, right? And so most of the time, when you think about children, it's almost just innate. You just think about their innocence, right? And then you start to see like over time, like their tendencies, right? And you get to see some of their devious nature, right? And so, like, it's kind of cute in a way. It's kind of funny, like, in a lighthearted kind of way. But from like a psychological, clinical perspective, like if you go down that rabbit hole, it can have serious implications, right? And so, like, just kind of like sitting with it, but like, like, which way do you go with it? Like, do you keep it at like that lightheartedness where it's just kind of cute, or do you really like just like analyze it and pack it right? And so I don't know. I don't know if I could do this in like 12 minutes, but I know at 12 years old, Jesus, right? He was I think he was in the temples, right? And now he's teaching, right? In his own way, and they go on to say like they were amazed or they were surprised because like he was teaching with authority, right? And yet when Jesus begins his ministry, when he officially begins his ministry, because at that age he was just a child, and so that shows that we can also learn from children. And so, not to unpack that, right, psychologically and delve into you know the serious implications of it, let's keep it lighthearted, right? And so Jesus was the light, right? And so on the Sermon on the Mount, I mean, there's many ideologies, right? But the thing about it, and you know, each and every ideology, let's just say it like this, right? Because we want to keep in mind the civil aspect of it, right? And so, do we have to keep the civil aspect of it? This is where I want to introduce the atheist, because if we don't consider the civil aspect of it, then like, what does the atheist have to say about it? Do atheists believe in civility? But beyond the serious implications, right, that a personality or character flaw might be revealed in a young innocent child, on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus recalls us and the people of that time that were listening to him that to inherit the kingdom, that the kingdom, like, they should be like children, right? And he was saying how to let the children come to him, right? And the children wanted to come. I think, one of his disciples was overly jealous of him. That he would say like, shoo the kids away, and like they that Jesus was teaching something different. He was inviting them and welcoming them, actually, right? And the reason being is because, and I've I've written about this, but like, it's just me processing it. Like I didn't sit down like and really like edit it or anything like that. I was just kind of like in the moment, kind of trying to distract myself but focus at the same time. And so I was like, I just, well, what is it that I'm processing? What is it that I'm feeling, right? And so I think I'm on a subway ride, and I'm like just typing away pretty much, right? And around that time, um, and it's interesting because like I really don't read too many books, and just, part of it maybe because out of ignorance, you know what I mean. But like, you could dissect that how you want, you know what I mean. Like, I could tell you about Isaac Asimov as little and limited as I might know, and may or may not impress you, but either way, I haven't read too many books, right? And so I gotta say, Vigilant 550 is my only defense, right? And so, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, run that up. Yeah. Where we at with it, man? And so, you know, I could disregard the atheist and his foolishness, you know. Um, but that's not the only thing that I might consider foolish, right? And so there's so many ideologies, right? And so, I also wrote, even if you don't want to believe in God, right? So I'm reminded of the atheist. Even if you want to disregard God, right? Dismiss God, or you just wholeheartedly don't see Him, right? Because there's people, I've heard their testimony like, yo, God, if you're real, show me that you're real. Like, those kind of intense moments when they're by themselves, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, everybody might have deserted or abandoned them, or they might have felt that way in their panic or in their, you know, panic attack, or whatever, you know, rock bottom or moment of solace, or that ain't even the moment of solace, because that comes after, like, you know what I'm saying, like the revelation, right? And so, like, it looks different at different stages of your life, right? And it's probably based off of what you can understand and what it might be preparing you for, right? And so, like, literally, like, there's so many things about this life, this thing called life, this simulation some have alluded to, right? And so it's like, even if you don't want to believe in God, even if you can't believe in God, even if you're so far away or so far gone from God, like, there's still this whole conversation that always is like still revolves around God, right? And at the same time, it's like the God in you contends with that to the point where it's like, just like God is able to create, you feel like you can create your own reality, right? You create your own future. You create your own life, right? And in many regards, yes, right? And absolutely, right? And that has to also deal with, like, a construct, right? And what you construct, right? And so that also, in biblical ways, or like that religious aspect, has to do with, like, harvest and produce, right? And literally, like, cultivating, right? And so, like, when I was in the psych ward, I just kept advocating for agriculture, right? And some of y'all might like know me so well that you already know at least in two dynamics, or I don't want to say like that, at least in two um in two in two in two in two in two in two forms or two platforms, I I would approach that, right? And so like literally like um that's just one aspect of it, right? And I'm thinking about streams and like literally like I just kind of like went outside, got some fresh shit, and I don't know why, but like I was surprised that it was like I like drizzle, but at the same time not really, right? And so you know what I mean, like my half black, half Spanish ass, right? I ain't black enough to be black, I ain't Spanish enough to be Spanish, right? So like my Spanish side comes in, right, and I start listening to the song in my head. I'm like La Lluvia, La Lluvia, and I don't know. I think about that song every day. So not every day, like I think about that song like sometimes, right? And so like I remember that song from like little, like it's not like somebody taught me that, right? So this is why like I just scratch my head and I be just understanding things way different. And so it's like I remember typing about more recently like I well, I might beg to differ and and challenge you, if you wanna say that God really is just your higher nature, right? You know what I'm saying? I might beg to differ, even though I'm supposing that, right? And like I said, I'll consider my opponent's like perspective, right? And so, I'm not saying that like they gotta be an outright opponent, but whoever might challenge my just way of understanding it, right? And so I'm not necessarily trying to impose my will, but I also understand, right? And so it's funny, right? Because like like right before that, right? Like so I'm like scrolling, right? And so like some things I'm subscribed to, like some things just pop up, right? So I was watching like it seemed like it was a sermon, right? And like it was a foreign sermon, right? And it looked the same, but it looked familiar. It looked like what I expected it to look like, and it also looked like things that I seen. It looked like I've been there. It looked like at the same time, like that's different from like what I'm accustomed to, but not really. You know what I'm saying? So like, and it was outside, right? And so it was like I wasn't there, but like for like watching it for like a second, like I felt like I was right there, right? And so like it reminded me of other things that I've seen right throughout life too, right? And so like it's crazy because like a lot of people make a big thing about speaking in tongues, right? And so like I mean I would go back because like I try to stick to the words, so when it comes to it, like I wouldn't try to debate somebody about tongues, but I might see somebody debating, right? And so like I also understand that that's human nature, right? And so like I was reading, right? Like I mentioned, I think like on a voice memo last Saturday, matter of fact, right? So I just came back from the gym, right? And so then afterwards, like what I mean, like I was like drunk in the spirit, but like I also had like a little little something to sip on, right? And so like literally like there were certain things that preceded that, right? And so like some of these conversations, like they might sound like debates in different aspects, but like they really not, right? And so like it's not like I sip all the time, and some extra religious or judgy person, they don't even gotta be religious. Like it could be some something as simple as a psychologist. Like they might say, "Oh, that's alcoholic" or something like that. I'm not saying. I'm just saying like there's various different opinions, right, from different kind of specialties and expertise, right? And know-it-alls and such and talking heads and such and all of that type of nonsense, right? And so all of these things just break down to what ideologies, right? And so long form content circling back, just saying like anybody's ideology could be, open to be challenged, right? And so this is exactly what happened in heaven. But we're talking about earth, and a lot of times in just our carnal state and our carnal mind, we just think about the things that we got to contend with while we're down here. We're not necessarily thinking about heaven, right? And so, like, there's different ideologies, right? And one aspect, someone might tell you, like, yo, like, life is to be enjoyed, right? And so, you know, you don't necessarily want to, like, be so you know what I'm saying? That's a whole nother ideology, right? So I'm not even trying to fill in that blank, because that filling that blank could be filled in with anybody's opinion or fact. Now, I suppose th- that this God that you're talking about, right? He does exist, but at the end of the day, life is something that you you make, right? Life is something that you make, right? And so the ability to create, God has given us that, whether you as an atheist or whatever your ideology is after that, right? Because the atheist supposes that we came from nothing. I mean, even if they acknowledge the Big Bang, they won't acknowledge what ignited or what was the catalyst for the Big Bang. And so nothing preceded it. And so whatever your ideology is after that, that's what we fill in the blanks with, right? And some of it is just utter nonsense, pure stupidity, right? And some of it is culture, and some of it is tradition, and some of it is just human nature, and some of it is divine. And so you think about some of the greatest minds, right? And we all have our idols, and God tells us not to have idols. And so we're just gonna consider what the atheist considers, and there's no God. And so if there's no God, I might fall victim to idolizing someone. And I might idolize someone for the most vain reasons. Maybe vain ain't the word. But what would be a better word? And so you got a problem, Brian, because you like to overthink. But I think it's important that I consider what would be the best word that I could use. But you got a slow brain, so and you got a limited vocabulary. And so you might not know any other word to say what you want to say. and so I shouldn't listen to you. And so Moses was slow of speech. And when translated, a lot of people say that he had like some kind of like stuttering or speech impediment, right? I don't know if he necessarily had Tourette syndrome or something, but he had some kind of like some kind of like speech impediment, right? Um, Maybe I don't know if the Egyptians spoke a different language, and so like maybe because he also like spoke two different languages, sometimes that be tripping me up sometimes, right? Like yo, I swear to you, like yo, I got my last name is Roberts, right? And so like like white people, they supposedly like like avocados, and so like for them is it's guacamole, right? And so like I for the life of me always forget that, and I can never say that word in English. Like I'm always thinking about aguacate, right? Sometimes, right? And it's like I have a way of like not just understanding like this, like what I'm saying, like but like the two languages, and so that's why like going back when I might not fully understand it, but because I don't fully understand it, I also got a perspective on it, which for lack or for dumbing it down or for just pure illiteracy or just like not knowing, like it also gives me a also a different interpretation or interpretation, right? And it's not to like change things or anything, but like this is also like the challenge when it comes to like also like interpreting the Bible, right? So the original is Hebrew and Greek, right? And so Moses was a Hebrew, right? And so we know this, right? And so like we know we know we know like the offense that he took, when he seen his brothers mistreated and things like that, right? And we know eventually like how he led the Israelites, which is the nation that birthed him, right, out of Egypt, right? And so, you know, Moses Moses is like for me like I wouldn't I wouldn't I wouldn't call him a idol, but like what I mean, like when it comes to historical figures, like there's people that they might idolize whoever they idolize, right? I'm not telling you who to idolize, who not to idolize, right? And they may do this consciously or unconsciously, right? And so consciously they're probably setting up some kind of like some kind of like altar or something, right? And it's weird, right? I don't know too much about that stuff, and I don't want to offend anybody, right? But there's also all these kind of ideologies, right? And because there's all these ideologies, they're gonna bring offense because whether it's knowingly or unknowingly, they're gonna kind of like challenge each other, right? You know what I mean? And the simple way of explaining it is because it's spiritual warfare. Because a lot of it, a lot of what is conscious and whatever is subconscious is spiritual, right? And so when it comes to like outer space, we can't really explain it, but there's also like dark matter, right? And dark energy, right? There's always gonna be some kind of like polar, like you know, ethereal, mysterious kind of thing that's kind of like hard to explain, which is why like a lot of people believe in magic, but even some magic is even explainable, right? And so ultimately it's an illusion, right? Especially when compared to like what is really powerful, right? And so when it goes back to Moses, as I was just talking about, with Moses, he had to like actually challenge, right, the the authority because they had a different belief system, right? And in their belief system, whether knowingly or unknowingly, they also did what? Practice magic, right? Now it's so interesting because the Bible has a theme on magic, right? And when it comes to magic, like it might not necessarily be magic that we're talking about, but ultimately it could be some form of, to be quite honest with you, in some ways pseudoscience, because it's hard to explain. But it could be some form of jinn. It could be some form of voodoo, hoodoo, some way to try to manipulate, which is in a way, um, ultimately, and this is where like the atheist, like knowingly or unknowingly, fucks up, right? Because then you got to go back to the "I Told You So" book, and the "I Told You So" book has certain historical facts that, although you could challenge, they're still irrefutable, right? And so one thing that like has been in like relevant topics of, even going back, and I'm mad that I didn't pay a lot more attention to it at the time because I can't really give you the 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 post dating aspect of what I'm trying to tell you. But like more recently, they've been talking about Egypt and what they've discovered, through like, it's not lidar, technology, but it's some form of, and they've explained it, and I think I briefly like, miss, or gave some kind of disinformation about it, but like I didn't do that, I definitely didn't mean any harm, and this is why you got to listen to the experts, but I don't have everything in front of me, which is bullshit because I could easily just pull it up. Um, the I'm kind of summarizing, right? And so like, that's open for many kind of like challenges and whatnot. And so, I get back to this overthinking, right? And so like, I'm like, surely there has to be a better word than vain, but vain literally basically might be the best way. If not, I could still kind of like come up with another word, but it might shift the understanding of it, right? And so when translating from one language to another, it's you lose some interpretation and you gain some interpretation in some aspects, in some ways, right? And so light has a way of doing that in a way where, it resonates in so many facets and aspects, and it has dynamic where it could create shadow, right? And so in some realms, you know, life is light is conducive to life, and in other realms, light exposes an aspect of life that is unpleasant and, is indesirable, and it's almost, um, one and the same. Yet it's still the flawed aspect of it, right? And so you have so many ideologies where it's like, I mean, Confucius was one of the great minds, and in my ignorance, I'm not gonna say that that's where Taoism came from, but I know that his perspective, um, also encompassed the the enlightened truths, the greater truths, right, of what life is, right? And so this is like the philosophical approach of it, but that's the contrast, or like that's the irony of it, because like with philosophy, there's also this aspect of not doing, right? And life is something that should be kind of like done, right? And should get to it. So you don't want to overthink it, right? You just kind of want to do it, right? And so for some people, you think about the consequences afterwards, and for some people, you can you can make mistakes, and you understand that that's how you learn and how you move forward, and for some people, like, their mistakes crush them, right? And they stay stuck and they stay stagnant, right? And so there's so many approaches, right? And so trying to break free, right? And like literally like understand that, you know, you have this one life to live, right? And so with this life that you live, like, you wanna you wanna but see, like, this is the thing, like, you live in this this kind of like cluster B society, or this society that's fueled by narcissism, right? And it's nothing new, but it's just exacerbated, right? And so like literally like for me, like, you know it seems like I'm just all over the place, but like I'm just covering a lot of like I'm covering a lot of like deeper truths while doing my best to try to like move forward, right? And so the situation from last week to this week, um, I literally I came across TTS, right? And I got the file. I didn't bother listening to it, right? And so I mentioned TTS because um, in one way, I was talking about that song, and I haven't I haven't like really listened to it to be reminded how to perform that song, and I never really performed that song, and I mentioned it last week. I alluded to it, and so um, I remember where I was at, right, and so I bring it up, and it's like I'm not gaslighting myself, right, and so why should I feel any type of way about it, right? And so I'm in the gym yesterday, right? And so I didn't go to the gym a few days, and so like I don't make excuses, right? And so you know, before yesterday, I'm in the gym, and I I, I constantly like sometimes like while I'm in the gym, I struggle between being interactive and not being interactive, right? And so um I don't know why, but like either way, like sometimes I just don't think about it, right? And so like literally like I'm the time before yesterday, I think I'm at the leg press machine and I'm working out with somebody because I needed to do that. I was there, I think the day before, or whatever, right? And so I don't really remember the sequence of events correctly, but I think the day before that I'm describing, when I get there, like it's a joint there, right? And so like I'm glad I'm reminded of this, right? Because like I'm never really going in circles, but like I just be trying to explain it, and you know you might not catch it till like, you know what I mean, however you catch it, but some of y'all don't skip a beat, and so like I ain't tripping, so like literally um I'm in the gym, right? And like when I get there, it's some joint, and like she got like a yellow shirt, right? And so like I ain't trying to talk about her or nothing like that, right? But like when I get there, right, like I don't be knowing the respect, right? So like I get there, like I said, struggle between interacting and not interacting, right? So like I get there, right, and I'm like, oh, alright, I got a little issue, right? And so like I try to rectify the issue, right? But it's to my surprise I had a misunderstanding. So whatever, I get to like get familiar with the staff and they like explain it to me, right? So like they explain it to me and then I understand, right? So I'm like I'm like good to like a certain point, but like I didn't know that that fee that I was charged was a late fee. I thought it was something else. So like now I got like two fees on top of that, and it's just like it's just like a kind of like a challenge to kind of like stay, you know what I mean, like and you know what I mean, like stay, you know, in a good flow, whatever the case is, right? And so like anyway, like they got a joint there, right? And so like to my surprise, like her tag says trainer on it, right? And so I'm like, I found that weird or whatever the case. So I got to interact with her, right? And management, right? And so like I think she was kind of new or whatever. So managers was telling her something, right? And so like that's when she introduced herself. So then I started talking to management, and then from there at some point, like I just get to my workout, and so I forget. Well, like she like I don't know, but see, this the crazy thing, right? Yo, so this the crazy thing, right? Hold up. This the crazy thing, right? So I be having like thoughts to myself, right? Cause like I'm supposedly either antisocial or like weird and socially awkward, right? And so like there's this INFJ stuff that I'm not sure like if I fit the bill for, but like literally like the thing about it is like it's a personality type, right? And so personalities are gonna kind of be dictated by like in some ways your character or your personality, and there might be like like other things, right? But ultimately these are also like just things that are part of your conscious and your unconscious, right? And your innate, right? And so going back to just the innocence of a child, right? And so whether you go and unpack that or you don't, right? And so like you stay where you at, so you atheist, right? And so you might not understand the conventional versus the unconventional, right? And so for you, like everything has to be conventional. So like numbers and statistics and probability, like is where your expertise or your tendency or your just like your faculties like are aligned with, right? And so I made a song, right? Speaking of alignment, right? I made a song and I talk about Telemi in the song, right? Now Telemi was someone who like I can't explain too well, but this is why I'm not a teacher. Tsunami actually like infiltrated in many ways, for lack of a better word, Egypt, right? And so still on task, we're talking about Egypt, right? And so the part that he infiltrated was proceeded and really conquered through Alexander the Great. But Ptolemy at some point he was one of the like I think the minds that came up with the Pythagorean, or if not the Pythagoras, um might have something to do with the Fibonacci sequence, right? But I think the Pythagor, and I'm not even pronouncing it correctly, right? And so like, you know, like, 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 I don't know if there's such a thing as a ghetto scholar, right? But check it though. Jesus was the greatest teacher, right? And he grew up in a ghetto called Nazareth, right? And so, like, his parents had to flee from where they were, right, and head over to Egypt. Meanwhile, going back to Moses had to lead his people out of Egypt, right? And a lot of it had to do with oppression, right? And so we don't really know what took place in Egypt, and the Bible is supposed to either shed some light on it, but many consider the Bible not historical. If anything, if they give it some kind of compliment or even some kind of backhanded compliment. They might call it allegorical, but for many, it's very contentious, and for many, um, they hold different opinions, and for many, but it seems quite a few regard it as sacred, and yet some of these people might tell you that it's the word of God, and so for some certainly, and for some God give us free will so we can subscribe to anything. And so I was watching the interview, right? And so I got to get back to that interview, right? So I was watching it, right? And it caught my attention, right? And it's with Will Smith and Lecrae, right? And so look, I know from what I do know of these two gentlemen, right? Um, obviously um, for me, I'm gonna just start off at this juncture before I even go on and say who they are, who they're not. They're two humans, two male humans, and um, they have a claim. Um, they have status and celebrity, and they've done many good and even great works, and yet they also know what it feels like to contend with popularity and contend with the world, and in even some regards contend with God or their own understanding of God and everything else that comes with life, right? And so, like, speaking of idols, right? We were talking about idols, right? And so, we're not gonna grow past atheists. Like, we have the option to. We don't even want to. We don't even. We're so. We consider that such a disgusting and distasteful option that we are not even gonna regard it as an option or anything beyond that. We willfully acknowledge that we're atheists and there's nothing that you could tell us, and so we're gonna stay rooted that there isn't a God, and if there is a God, He has given us the ability to be gods because we're His children. And now, when we get to that understanding, and this could be conscious or subconscious, you start to wonder, like, I wish which God do I want to serve, right? And so I go back to what I was typing, right? And so it's like you contend that there is no God. I beg to differ. But even if you somehow convince me or persuade me or flat out gaslight me to make me think that I'm wrong, I'm still giving you this and telling you that just by accepting God, you might be accepting your higher nature. Your highest nature. And since you want to tell me that your highest nature is non binary, because somehow, some way, your consciousness has led you to have some kind of primacy or supremacy. Would I be offensive to say to think? Or would it be disrespectful maybe to reduce your fact to an opinion? And so we can all subscribe to whatever we want to subscribe to, no doubt. And so like why hate God? Like he created you. He's also giving you the ability to have free will to acknowledge him or not. And so if you acknowledge him, he said he created man, both of them, right? In his image, man and women, right? And so man and women, right? And so like I mentioned it, so the staff member, she had a yellow shirt on, right? And I don't know, you know me, man. I be overthinking, man. I guess it be making me socially awkward, right? So like, I be going in the gym. I don't even know what I'm gonna do, y'all. I don't even know if this thing is recording, y'all. I don't know nothing, man. I tell you, man. Yo, so I get there and I get on the bike. You know what I'm saying? And so I pick up where I last left off, right? So I got things in mind, right? So like, trying to get to them, right? So like, I peeped the joint, right? And so like literally like I've had plenty conversations or discourses or whatever it is how y'all receive my content, right? And so like I for myself I find myself like going back to my like I don't know my nature, right? My dominant too, right? Like and so like I start thinking like how like I was when I was like at the library, right? And so like I seen this joint, right? But like I ain't even trying to like really like play myself, right? So like I won't necessarily call it my known nature. So that's why I just said my nature, right? Cause like going back to what I was saying, right? Like this nature, right? Like like there's this aspect of it that is flawed, right? Which is why it doesn't like the light on it, right? And so like the light kind of exposes it, and like it exposes the undesirable aspects of it, right? The only thing that that aspect, which is like a false good, is that it likes to hide in it, right? And so there's certain things about like you know what I mean, like of recent, like I mentioned, like doing some shadow work, right? And so like there's certain things where it's like it's just part of our nature, right? And it's not to like escape because in one way there's none other than what the Messiah brought forth, right? And so like I'm reminded when I head to the library, right? Like and so like I never pulled that stunt, right? You know what I mean? Like probably I got so many I don't know. Too many people don't, or too many things to kind of like contend with. So I always kind of like put my mind in like the right perspective, right? So like, you know, I remember telling y'all like how I want to like crossing the street, thinking to myself like, damn, should I pull out Yui or not? You know, what I mean, just to have fun with it. You know what I mean? But then nah, right? So I never circled back to it, right? But anyway, I got this drink like like I don't got this drink, but like whatever, like I, like I don't force shit, you know. Really, I mean, I don't want to say it like that, but like what I'm saying is like going back to like probabilities and numbers, right, and just like statistics, like what was the probability that I was gonna want to have some interaction with her, right? And so like that's one aspect of it, and then the overthinking aspect of it, you know, that would be a good interaction, right? And so on and so forth, right? So many ways to kind of like just look into it, right? And so like not to overthink it, right? And so like I get there, I don't even know what type of work I'm gonna get into, but I'm like, all right, let me just start off the bike. So I head over to like one of the bikes. And I'm on a bike, and then soon that I'm into it, like she appears, right? And so like eventually, like I don't know how long she was there for, but by the time I finished what I was doing on that bike, like I literally like start interacting with her, yo. My legs are super tight, right? And so she a trainer, so like I pick out her brain for advice, right? So it's like I don't really know what to do, and so it's not that I shouldn't know what to do or whatever, but like I said, I don't really know nothing. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't even know if this thing is recorded, type of thing, right? And so like literally, like let me get closer, right? And so like you know, it's so weird that like in this day and age, right? Like it don't even have to be like marriage, right? But like just the interaction between, cause I gotta keep going back. I gotta stay on task, right? He created them, man and women, right? And so it's so weird to just even interact, and it could be in any kind of setting, you know what I'm saying? And so it's so weird to the point that like, yo, literally like, yo, I get along with my mom like she my sister. I get along with my dad like she my sister. And that shouldn't be the case. Now, I recognize that, but the thing about the fact of the matter is like I'm not in a position where I was previously, you know what I mean? So I'm in a more closer setting. And so it's like I recognize like the family dynamics of it, and you know what I mean? Like at one point it was just very challenging, but then I just started having fun with it, you know what I mean? So like Lee, I be wilding out sometimes, but like I know like one, this is why I'm not a teacher because you'll get overly scrutinized. But I know at the same time, it's like, yo, I got so many distractors that want to look for any little point of pick and pride and try to break me down. So I had to show you some information. I don't know if that was the angle of the other content creator, but like this is long form content, right? And so still on task, right? And so we talking about owning, right? But more importantly, owning, there's really nothing to say about that, right? But I guess he covers it. And so I'm just focused on the lineage, right? Divine of Judah, right? And so this is where the Messiah comes in, right? And so previously or earlier, I was talking about how, at the young age, we he's accustomed already, right? Remember, he was the first of all his siblings, right? And so Jesus knows what it feels like to have brothers and sisters and have brothers and sisters and like literally like he knows what that feels like, right? And so we talking about family and things like that, right? And so um it's important that you understand this because I thought about this, right? Now it's gonna be a challenge for me to deliver this because like I'm not I'm not in my domain. So you gotta, you know what I mean, be understanding like literally like I well he doesn't give content all the time because there's certain aspects and even when I was, but I gave a little bit more frequently, you know what I mean? So with this stream of consciousness, like how long are we into this? I think we like an hour and some change into this, right? And so like um I was talking about Noah, and I keep going back to Noah, right? And um, I got into a conversation that got intense, and I was reminded of Noah, right? But I'm always talking about Noah, right? Hand dead, right? And I was just now talking about the gym, right? And so I'm in the gym, and I don't know what the probability was, but like literally, like I'm interacting with this joint, and like there's so many different ideologies, and like it's so weird that it's not even just a challenge or a struggle to just kind of like what does it look like to be a Christian, but like what does it look like to even be a man, and like I have to kind of like wonder all of that simply because like the definition constantly, you know, is always kind of like restructured, or like, you know what I mean, ultimately, like nobody knows what that is just as much as like the justice doesn't know what a woman is, or could tell you what a woman is. And it's just like, how did we get to like these areas of society where like the dominant way of thinking, when it's just so rudimentary, that like, it's, you know, boys have penises and girls have vaginas. It's so like rudimentary. It's so like, you know what I'm saying, like gender dysphoria is not a real thing. Like what your experiences is. So I'm not trying to invalidate you or hit you with any kind of disinformation, but that is witchcraft ultimately. That is spiritual warfare ultimately, and that is a whole industry, right? And when we talk about industries, industries are not necessarily things that put God at the forefront. And so that's why I says that, like, you know, the commercial interest like shouldn't have the commercial interest. But then even a whole soldier, and so I was talking about a soldier yesterday, right? And so, I mean, what do I know about a soldier? Like, at the very least, like I'm a civilian, right? Oh, hold up, we go back to civility. So are you telling me that somehow, some way, you're capable of thinking outside of atheism? Because why would an atheist be concerned with civility? Also, are you trying to reduce atheists to just brutes and barbarics? Dunce? Big old dummies? But then they would look like oligarchs. Like, hold up, wait, what are you talking about? Hold up, hold up, hold up, hold up, hold up, hold up. So now you introducing all kind of ideologies. Are you gonna reduce that to a conspiracy, or are you gonna reduce that to an alternative fact? Not a rumor shifting. Are you kind of woozy, dizzy? Let me grab you by your hand. I know the room's spinning. Stop right here. I'm here. Stop. And so, like, in my dominant nature, right? I'm like, I'm frustrated. But I shouldn't be. Now, I alluded to some. Let's keep this stream of consciousness, right? Steady. That offers us some stability. Now I'm less frustrated. Take a little pause. I don't know what to say. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to speak in vain. And so, which way do I go, right? All right, let's stay on task, right? And so, I was dizzy, right? And so, like, coloring, right? Well, I really wasn't coloring, but like it depends on what time and where I was at, right? And so like this time I'm coloring in the psych ward, right? And I'm sitting at the table. I'm at the table with some kid named Kevin, right? And so we talking and we had different conversations, right? And so like like I see like Kevin got a certain way of thinking, right? And I got a certain way of thinking. I remember the first time we interacted with each other, right? And so like he tried to tell me about myself, right? And so like something they said, like I noticed while I was around Kevin, like he got a way of knowing how to get under your skin, right? And so like I was just in a sick environment where motherfuckers knew how to do that, so they was doing that to each other in various different ways. So like I just remember Kevin saying in his accent, "You feel some type of way, right? You feel some type of way, right? You feel some type of way." Yo, with his accent, that shit was funny though. Like I said, these motherfuckers is sick, right? So you know how I get under each other's skin, right? So I'm reading this book, right? And so like I'm interacting with my dad, right? And so I ain't read the book in a few days, right? And so I'm hopping all over the place, but like it's a greater, deeper meaning in it, right? And so um I'm telling him about the book, right? And so he take a dig at me, like you ain't finished that book yet, but he ain't say it like that, but like I was more straight to the point, right? And so like you know, for greater minds or more intelligent minds, like yo, this nigga's so stupid, he don't know how to read a book, right? And so I'm my dumb ass is reading him the book, right? And if you listen to me read, like I might sound stupid, right? Or not intelligent or whatever, right? And so I'm struggling to read him. I'm struggling to read him like these words is on a page, right? So I don't want to speak in vain. And so like I tell him a few things that I'm reading off of the page, right? And the streams of consciousness that were occurring to me while I was reading it prior to interrupting him, right? And so I recognize that he's getting ready to go somewhere, even though I'm not in front of him. And I'm like, damn, like I don't know what type of move he gonna make. And like I got a bad habit of asking questions so people feel like I interrogate them. So like he answered it mad, like defensive, right? And so like I didn't mean that, but that was the reaction. And then it's like, duh. And it's not like duh, it has more like to do with other things that I spoke on earlier. But like regardless of the fact, like like I ain't talking about judgy or nothing like that. Like I really just kind of like reading a book, right? And so as I'm reading the book, it was a number of days before I read it, and so like the last time I read it was around the time that I'm describing to you the interaction that I had with the young lady, right? And so not the first young lady that I'm referring to, right? And so now I'm talking about two different women, right? And so like literally like um you know what I'm saying, like for anybody that want to scrutinize me, yo, see, look, he's misogynistic, right? And so, like, there's a whole nother aspect or another way that another person might just be looking like, because the accuser of the brethren thinks the same way, but they may not recognize that they work in that kind of capacity, right? And so they might just be pro this and pro that, right? And it might just be feminist, right? And so it's gonna go against like a male perspective, right? And just a male in general, right? And so the fact of the matter is that um that is a prevalent way or prevalent contemporary thought, right? And so it's something that like at me as a male I have to deal with like almost like on an everyday basis, right? And in subtle ways, ways that I don't even know that I might be under attack, right? And so I see this young lady with the yellow shirt. I don't know what the probability is, right? And at times, like you know what I'm saying, like um, I might have not understood this whole feminism, and I might not understood how much, because I mentioned the word attack, right? How much of an opponent it is, how much of it is dangerous, how much of it is against me and my existence, my very existence, and I might, in my naivete, um, not consider these things when it comes to that ideology, right? And I just finished saying like even down to my own existence, right? And so it's interesting because in that interaction at some point like we had like you know a pretty lengthy interaction. Like I can't say that I interact with most people at that length, and you know in some aspects like I like that, and some aspects is like you know I mean I'm always appreciative of space and individual and personal space, right? And so in that like I'm weird and I might contradict myself because like that was our first interaction and like I touched her, right? And I've done that in m- many instances with different people, and like I don't know if I should say that that's a binary or non-binary thing, but like ultimately like just didn't matter what they were, if they were male or female, right? And so or child and young, and never were like pure or like impure, but most of the time like innocent or playfully, like not to say like devilish, but then that's when you like now you're gonna demonize a person, you know what I mean? Which is why I wanted to keep it lighthearted, and that's why I kept and I introduced Jesus in the conversation earlier, right? And so the thing about it is like if you psychoanalyze it and you get into like that dynamic of understanding and interpretation, then literally like you just might demonize a person. You might not recognize that you demonize the person, but you might get to a level where it's like, all right, well, this person is a narcissist. Now I've read and I've also even considered and I thought that myself and questioned it, and I'm also on the belief system that yeah, like narcissists are demons. Like literally, like I'm not concluding that, but at the end of the day, like the Bible doesn't outright speak on it, but when you get to like the greater understanding of it, then you really understand that ultimately, like, and this is a discovery that, like, I wound up like actually uttering like while in the psych ward, right? That ultimately I believe that there's are narcissists and there's empaths, right? And I get to that conclusion over some like experience and some like gathered information and some observation, right? Observations, right? And so like back to this whole feminism, right? Like so like you know the attacks even in subtle ways, right? And so like you know in your innate ways of thinking, you're you you're gonna like you know as a dude like you're not like necessarily born red pill, right? You're not necessarily born red pill. You're not necessarily born red pill. However, I have to say not necessarily because like there's still an inkling of it. And like and it's not even a brag or boast, but like I have to just get back to like my dominant way of thinking, right? And so like there's different ways where that appears in each and every one of us, right? And so like I have to kind of like tread lightly when I say this, but then I have to say tread and follow my words carefully because I also mentioned like the trekking and the unpacking, right? And so let's not forget about Jesus, right? And holding every thought captive to Jesus, right? And so, like, literally, like, what happens when I think about it, I think about it and I think about it real well, right? And I say to myself, all right, well, um, you know, I see this like PYT, you know what I'm saying? Like, not for nothing, I'm a dude. I probably might want to get my training information and my education from a dude who's bigger than me. That's what I'm thinking, right? I probably might want to get advice from someone whose body is more similar to, like, my body, right? And so, you got this feminist that think that men and women are equal, right? And so the atheists, for them, God doesn't exist, and for them, in extreme cases, because not every atheist thinks that people are non-binary. And so I get back to what I was saying, right? The I told you so book. And so everybody has a fucking opinion, and everybody's opinion is subject to be criticized. And now, what helps us minimize some of it, because some of us love to debate, but some of us don't. And so the thing about it is, we get to the point where we like to resort to facts so that we have less debates, because these debates can lead to arguments, and arguments can lead to passionate retaliations, right? And so ultimately, it's war. And what is it good for? But the thing about it is, the war you're talking about, yeah, you could question that. But the war I'm talking about, spiritual warfare, and that's not one that you could question. And it calls for you to be vigilant, just like a real soldier in times of war. And so, without you recognizing, right, without you recognizing that you're under spiritual warfare because you're being attacked, you will fall victim. And so, this is where I have to introduce this element, right? Because I'm not here trying to scour the internet to, you know, just criticize anybody or come up with content because I'm bored. I recognize the niche of my content, the need for it, the obscurity, and why it's obfuscated when it shouldn't be, right? But just like when I was on Broad Channel, it's still on Broad Channel, right? And so the algorithm, the algorithm that's associated with me, that since I was talking about is the wind an algorithm? Man, that 747 over so many people had. But let's not go back too far back in time, right? And so all of these consciousness, right? All of these ways of thinking, right? And yet, before anybody, any intelligent mind that's alive today, even before any latest chat GPT installation, right? When the Hebrew word came up with the word install, right? Before the English language was able to translate what was in the Bible, I don't really understand if you understand the revelation of that. And so I gotta contend with many things, right? And so at times there'll be one voice, and other times there'll be another voice. And this is why let those who have ears listen, right? And some of them will be sheep and some of them will be goats. But we let God deal with that. And so they very cunningly are accusers of the brethren, right? And so I'm not scouring the internet looking for anything per se, right? And so when it comes to the streams of consciousness, right, and the subtle attacks of the spiritual warfare, right, let's keep in mind of recent, and I'm not sure even how recent, because this war with Ukraine's been long standing, right, and to the point of different regimes or different cabinets, right, different presidential cabinets, right, and so you know in these 2 weeks that I kind of like overarchingly spoke of, right? And I've dived into different, moments and times within those 2 weeks, right? Of recent, something that I'm trying to find ways to kind of like push out there. Hopefully some of y'all might have like, at first thought it was some kind of weird thing that I'm into, but now all of a sudden kind of see some potential in it. You know what I mean? But I know I'm up against a lot. But either way, um, you know, um, I wound up uh, there's a few programs that I'm kind of like undertaking right now, and I have different approaches when it comes to like learning at my best, and I might not have the fastest processor, right? And I might have something that's diagnosed as a hint of retardation, and it's called ADHD, right? Not ADHD, but hyper ADHD, right? And so I somehow, some way, can't stay on task, right? And I just have these other tendencies, right? And not only that, I'm also kind of stifled and restricted and suffocated, and I have so many other distractors and also proponents and just overall life, right? And so whatever it throws at me, right? And so when it threw me in a psych ward, right? Like I asked for my Bible, right? And that's when I was like getting a lot of downloads and a lot of installs, right? That were very different from when I had the phone, right? And so staunch people that would even go out on a limb and defend me would say, "Oh yeah, there was talk that yo, he's only doing that because of the phone." But I don't hear nothing but crickets when I actually had the Bible and it was doing it in real time. And it did it in real time. That literally like I had to contend, right? And at that time, I'm reading a lot about Moses, right? And um, Moses is kind of like also, uh, just the Bible in general, but like in many regards, something that I've had to kind of like continually remind folks about, right? And so Moises, 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 right? And so like literally, like I gotta go back way back in time because like literally, like time flies, right? In so many aspects, in so many ways, right? And so, like, you find yourself digging in the crates, right? So, like, I had to interrupt my dad, right? And so, like he took a little dig at me, right? And so, like, I'm reading this book, right? And so, I was telling you about the voicemail last Saturday, and on that voicemail, I was telling you about the missionaries that went all the way to Ecuador, and they were speaking to those that spoke the primitive language or the original language of those Indians in that region, right? And so I'm telling you about the gym, right? And there's so many things that I'm telling you about, right? And so, ¿qué es lo que este loco está hablando? Yo no entiendo este. ¿Qué disparate? And such, right? And so wherever there is someone that speaks in tongues, there should be an interpreter, right? And so I was watching like a sermon, right? Like I mentioned earlier, right? And so like it's weird because like I didn't see the whole thing because it was pretty lengthy, but like literally like I got some of it right, and then I'm like, yo, I gotta go back to it, but then it's so many things that I gotta get back to it. So like you know what I mean, the interview that I was telling you about, right? And so um like like I tell you that the Bible is about you, right? I tell you that. I have to tell you that. I have to tell you that. But I'm not the person who first said it, right? There's many first things that I've said, you know what I'm saying? But I like to give credit where credit's due. And so, like, I don't be lying. And so it's like I'm human, right? And so, you know, there's some things that I might say that might not be true, right? And so, like, there's other people that intentionally lie, right? And so that's a form of spiritual attack, right? And so this is long form content, right? And so like the short form content, like I gotta I gotta give it to you the long way because I'm still trying to tell you about the lineage, right? And so I gotta tell you about Judah. And so if I'm telling you about Judah, I gotta tell you about God, right? And so why I gotta tell you about God? And because God introduced himself to who? I mean, he introduced himself to a lot of people, and it's recorded in the Bible, which is another aspect of like another aspect of I could just say it this way of history. So when you find yourself in your personal story telling yourself, yo, where is God? You're not the only one who might have experienced that and wondered that, questioned that, or whatever the case may be, contended with that, right? And so the fact of the matter is, it's been recorded historically, people who've contended with that, people who've actually spoken to God, had some kind of revelation from God, who were directly under his kind of like heavy hand, or not even just the heavy hand, like also his protection, his guidance, all of the above, right? And so he even goes on to reveal how he sanctifies some. He even go on to reveal how he anointed some, right? He even go on to say he opened some of their wounds, right? And if we're saying that, then we're talking about the women, right? And so I was talking about Moses. Moses was the first. No, he wasn't the first, right? Was he the first? Cause in Goshen, I mentioned Abraham first, right? Before Moses. Now who came first? Now I don't claim to know those, so that's something that I gotta do my homework on. And if I'm gonna be a ghetto scholar, like, but I ain't no ghetto scholar, and most of the ghetto don't even want to know about Jesus. Oh, but they do want to know about Jesus, but they want to tell you about an idol that no, nah, Jesus was for real. And so yeah, we all gotta pick up our cross, and yeah, and so that person's story is interesting, and yes, and that person is fascinating, and yes, that person's story is motivational, and that person is this, that, and the third. But then easily, that person could become an idol. Now we making shrines or altars for that person, and we losing sight of the person who that we need to look forward to, right? And why we need to look forward to that person because the thing about it is that person is gonna return, and when that person returns, are we on task, or are we like the foolish virgins? And so careful where you make an idol, right? Because you might wanna commit all sorts of follies, right? And so at the same time, we know we live in this corrupt world, right? And so no servant is greater than his master. And at the same time, at the same time, why do I say at the same time? Because I want to remind you, we all got one common enemy. So even if you think the enemy that's in front of you is your enemy, trust me, that enemy that you think is your enemy, that enemy has the same enemy that you have. And so that enemy has an enemy. And so we all got one enemy. And so it says that you can't slave for two masters because you're going to hate one and love the other. Or you're going to despise one and cling to the other. Right? And so this is a deep conversation because I tell you the enemy that's not, I tell you the enemy that's in front of you is not your enemy. But you think I'm lying to you. But then even if I tell you that and you don't believe me, will you believe me that there's an enemy inside of you? Would you believe me if I tell you that there's an enemy that's inside of you? That enemy is so strong that it's like he's holding your mouth so you don't say yes. Inside your spirit is like, and now it's like you got paralysis. And that's a scary thing. Some people suffer from that. And there's a figure of speech that says analysis paralysis. And so when you overthink things, you can also find yourself in that same state of things, right? And so there's this level of cognitive dissonance, right? And so it's important that you have an understanding of the Bible, right? It's important that you live by godly principles. And it's important that you understand this matrix that we're involved in, right? And how this matrix uh, has a way of has a way of having a destructive nature to it, right? Because even in Moses' time, right? What did Pharaoh do? He put out a decree that all the Hebrews that they were supposed to be killed or slaughtered, right? And so this is how Moses came to be. And then right? Ironically, right? Uh, I'll just say it this way: an all-powerful algorithm interceded in in undermining that decree, right? An all-powerful algorithm, right? And that algorithm somehow, in a way where Moses was supposed to be slaughtered, he somehow saved, and he saved through the Nile River, right? Where his parents had to give him up, right? And yet Pharaoh's daughter, the same Pharaoh that decreed that all of them should be slaughtered, somehow preserves him. Do you understand this dichotomy? It's important that you understand this dichotomy, because if not, you're going to introduce confusion and dysfunction, and then you have something called dysphoria, and you have gender dysphoria. Now, from an infant, Pharaoh puts out this decree that these infants should be slaughtered. and yet his own daughter preserves him, and she preserves him because he was beautiful. That's how she described. Now, beauty is normally described when it comes to like feminine energy. Yet Pharaoh was not thinking about the girls. He was thinking about the males. And he said, all the boys. Now, why not the girls, but the boys? You see, at the time, and even before that, the Hebrews started to become populous, right? They started to grow in Egypt, and they were disliked. Just like in this country, you might have your own personal biases, right? Against another form or group or whatever the case is, right? And so the Hebrews and Pharaoh was Egyptian. They dwelled in the same land, but the Egyptians were natives of that land. The Hebrews were not originally from that land. And we know this why? Because of Abraham, right? Isaac and Jacob, right? Mainly Jacob, right? Right? Because what? Because of Joseph, right? And so now we have a timeline. Now we have a chronology, right? And so that normally stems from the father's lineage, right? And so it's important that we keep an account of both parents, but in primitive times where resources were limited or maybe they weren't, for whatever reason, it was more important to keep the male record as opposed to the female record. And so that is prevalent throughout the Bible. However, you do know of lineages of female accounts, right? But it's mainly males, right? And so there's this patriarchy, right? And so I go back to the day that I go to the gym, there's this young thing in front of me, right? And so I shouldn't even be thinking like that, right? But it depends on how you want to think about it. Because I'm not necessarily thinking misogynistic, but at the same time, you got this whole, like, I think feminism is toxic masculinity, and I think it's victimization as well, too. And so I'm reading this book, right? And it happens to be the same day, so I keep talking about these interchangeably, right? But not to draw any confusion, but at the same time, there's a reason why I'm talking about why some atheists subscribe to the non-binary ideology, right? And so that's the actual confusion, that's the actual gender dysphoria, right? And so the accuser of the brother is gonna make it seem like my way of thinking is wrong, right? And so prior to all of that thinking, somewhere in between this 2 week timeline that I keep telling you about, is almost 2 hours now. I have like different kind of thoughts, my dominant thoughts and interfering thoughts and things that I might consider, right? And so all of that, and so I've read material data that says that we have anywhere from like 50,000 thoughts to like 70,000 thoughts, and most of them are negative, right? And I like to tend to think of things in a healthy manner, and some of that's questionable, but like literally, like you know, just to keep it in brevity, like you have different industries, and when it comes to like holistic approach versus like the medical academia and that kind of science based um, you know, approach to, just the human condition or predicament, like like symptoms and sufferings, like literally, like there's again different ideologies, right? And so being socially political as well, like that's an ideology, right? And so, um, all of that I gotta mention to you like the musical aspect of it, right? And so songs of Moses, right? And so Goshen, right? And so covering the Old Testament, and then also like recognizing that similarly the Song of Moses and that's the one that we should look towards, right? And so like what does it look like as a modern day Christian in the 21st century? And so I don't know what struck Moses other than what I'm reading in the book, and that's an algorithm. That's the best way I could explain it, and the most mightiest algorithm that there could be. And so literally like if I pose it to you like that in this digital world, maybe somehow you might subscribe to it. But maybe you such an atheist that it's just like like that binary way of thinking is old school. And so it's like I I can't contend with you because C and JavaScript don't look like ones and zeros anymore. And so like in the process of these 2 weeks, like, you know, I'm I'm trying to see what language model, right, I should like associate with, right? And so what should I subscribe to first, right? And so it's instrumental because I remind you like the Hebrew language, right? And so the Bible holds precedence regardless if you're a detractor or protractor of it, right? The Bible holds precedence, and yeah, you could just refute it all you want, but that only leads to arguments that stem from debates that might have started with different ideologies imposing on themselves. So you have two kingdoms, and so someone's gonna tell you about liberating yourself and being free. And I guess the best way to feel free is like when you're a kid. To be quite honest with you, right? And so little do you know that as a kid you should be protected, right? Because the world is dangerous. So little do you know, and it's better that you don't know that, so that you can maintain your innocence. But then you realize at some point that you gotta kind of like somehow like not lose your innocence, but you're gonna lose your innocence, right? So this is why the Bible cuts through bone and marrow, right? Because in that innocence, right, that should be protected is something that so many people want to disregard, but it's so instrumental to your quality life, and that's morality. That is the center of the universe in that discussion when we think about it. And then when you dive into a more lengthier conversation, no piece about what I just finished saying, now you have to introduce God into the conversation. And so there's many gods. And so that could be true. But then from my understanding, and I don't claim to have supreme understanding, but from my understanding, simply put, God reigns supreme. He is sovereign. So even if there's other gods that could contend, they can't contend because ultimately there's just one God. And so there's many schools of thoughts, and then that leads to many different ideologies. But then central to that, if you're gonna have a civil conversation, now you have to introduce Yahshua, Hamashiach, right? Now you have to introduce Jesus, right? Now you have to, right? And then that turns into a deeper dive, and that turns into a conversational piece that's been going on for how long? But definitely since anybody who's currently alive. Now, if I'm lying, I'm lying. And so we going on in 2 hours in this whole lengthy discourse, right? And so like like there was elements of theology, right? Hopefully, I mean I didn't do too much scripture, like I should have retrieved a lot more scriptures, but if you're eating meat at this point, then you know which ones I'm referring to, right? And so why aren't you eating meat at this point? And so I even interject that after taking a long pause, and if you were following me in the stream of consciousness, you know exactly what I was referring to, right? And so sometimes I fill in the blanks, and I have a tendency of doing that throughout my whole ministry, right? In a way where it's more pronounced than actually just like saying it, right? And so I've said in various different forms, like, oh yeah, I recognize the great truth that, yeah, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Yeah, I also recognize that when the teacher's gone, that's when some of the students learn the most, right? And so the Messiah, so many awaited because they know what, and this is something that I wanted to say earlier, and you could pull up your statistics, right, and do all your mathematical computations, right, but just when it starts to not become binary and you're dealing with super numbers and you're dealing with things that I can't even talk about, but you got a quantum chip that could explain it in a matter of seconds and still won't even be able to give you the hardcore facts about what I'm about to say, right? And so literally, like, within all of those variants, right? Because we're gonna consider them, right? And so this is a dynamic conversation, and what happens is I could easily go off on any one of these tangents, right? And so that's why I just said variance. And so how is it? And so for all you data scientists out there, like, there's a way where your mind thinks like I gotta kind of like reduce this information into information that is more not just palatable, right? Because even before you refine it to that point, you want to know what you can consume, right? And so literally, like, especially like like when you're thinking about your resources and you want to know if you could go offline, right? And I mean that's something to even take into consideration, right? I mean for me, but certainly like it's also an option, right? And so like I would only consider it an option but if it's worthy. And so literally like I just went off on a tangent, but was it a worthy a tangent? Obviously, because it didn't take me too far from where I ultimately wanted to get to. And so, when it comes to like um um holding every thought captive to Christ, ultimately, when you're dealing with it civilly, you get to it. But even in brute force, you wind up having to ultimately recognize that. So every knee bows. Every knee bows, right? And so you could easily adopt, polytheism, and you could believe in however many gods, and it could look at however it look. Like it could be mythology, it could be something else, right? It could be anything else, right? It could be you ultimately saying that you're your own God, right? And there's still an element of truth to that. And when you hold it as a thought, right? And you hold it as a thought, right? And like you hold it as a thought to Christ, right? Because hold every thought captive to Christ, right? He even tells you what Psalm 82 is, right? Right? Because the word can't be nullified, right? But that's little g, right? So ultimately, what I just finished saying and what I just want to going on a whole roundabout loop-de-loop to say what ultimately you got to hold every thought captive to Christ, and you can't deny that simply because even when you dismiss that, even when you unrigidly want to hold on to the fact that there is no God, conventional and unconventional intelligence, wisdom highlights that there is. And so before we get to the basic prompts that we get to right now, we still gotta like get back to source, right? And so that was ones and zeros, right? And infinite ones and zeros. Have we evolved? Yes, right? And so this is where you want to add another element of that conversation, right? And so now this is another contention that I gotta contend with, right? And so I'm dealing with that in this current state of affairs, right? Because going back to like, oh, being disrespectful and what to consider option and not to consider option, right? So now I'm telling you about this, but I'm telling you about the young lady, right? And so I'm keeping it professional, but at the same time, like I'm not feeling insulted, but I'm saying to myself, yo, like I should be probably training with a dude, you know what I mean? But like for whatever reason, I'm training with a female. I don't want to offend her, and there's various reasons why I should be training with a dude, right? Now it depends on what your misogynistic ideology, understanding, crap or nonsense is, right? Because I might know myself, I might want to tend to flirt with the female, right? Regardless if I find her attractive or not. And so, like, that's part of my masculine energy. And so it ain't to be manipulative, but then there's also that aspect of like even if I'm not necessarily attracted to her, I still gonna want to try to like flirt with her. Like it's not that I'm turned off by her or whatever the fuck the case is. It's just something in my masculine nature that's just I can't understand. And I don't even gotta say it like that. I don't even. There's just something in my encoding that works that way, right? There's just something in my encoding that works that way. And so, in simple terms, it's just the masculine. Because when we're talking about components, right? And so, some females they get so in this feminine ideology that it's offensive, right? Remember what to consider option and whatnot, and so this whole thing is like a underlying attack, and that's offensive and all kind of other nonsense that I could just go into, but I'm gonna avoid that rabbit hole. But simply put, they'll get mad at the word female, and when we're talking about components, right? And so like I have to introduce this because like I told you I graduated in '99, right? And like ultimately like I have to say this because like the high school that I went to, I didn't learn this shit, but I wanted to like I didn't go to the high school that I wanted to go to, right? And I wanted to go to and somebody actually was speaking about this shit and I'm not piggybacking off of it and I got a lot of eyes on me and I don't want to get into this back and forth because I like and I shout people out and people don't necessarily do that, but I don't really make a big deal about it. And it's like let's not make my Brian's head any bigger or whatever the case is, right? When in reality, like I'm just a humble dude, but I gotta go into this long 4 hour thing, try to explain it. Hopefully, I got enough stories to explain it, right? And so, like, literally, like I wanted to go do ProCAD, right? And so like um I'm messing with this other piece of software, right? And so like fast forward it brings me all the way up into 2025. We're in the first quarter, right? Second quarter actually, right, of this year, right? And so like there's many ways to use AI, right? So last time I was talking to my brother, like we were talking about um a subsidiary, right? Pro, um, program, right? But it's open base, right? And that's the wonderful thing about it, right? And it's so open base that you can also download it offline, right? And so, like, literally, like, um, it's instrumental that I mentioned him, right? And so he, like, you know, and his leadership, and it's interesting because going to names, like names have a lot of things to do with it, right? In a lot of ways, like I've never necessarily criticized, even though sometimes I might have like seemed that way, but like my brother, like without him being a leader, like in a lot of ways, like he like there's a lot of things that he led. Like I'm happy that he was like I wish like he was more involved in my life because like at times like I felt like I had to like kind of be my own big brother, but like my brother was there in different moments. He popped up, right, but that was always because he was trying to figure shit out, and in some ways like I don't know if that was his approach with me, but like I guess like every older sibling has that like where they wanna being selfish or narcissistic in their own way, where they're living their life and they almost forget about their younger sibling, and then the younger sibling might also feel like abandonment. So there's also those kind of things that come into the whole dynamic. So I gotta mention that with the whole family thing, right? And you see the background thing that I got in the back, right? And so family's instrumental, right? And so like it takes many shapes and different forms, right? And so I mentioned to you about Noah, right? And let your mental brain go back in time and think about all the things I mentioned to you about Noah. But I'm still staying on task, right? And so like I got this joint, she's in front of me, and in my weakness, I might recognize like, and I might not necessarily consider it a weakness, but it might be a weakness, right? And so in my weakness, like I might, I might not get through that whole interaction and be professional, right? Now that doesn't mean that I violated her. That doesn't mean that I inappropriately touched her or anything or flirted with her, right? Like, but I still could wanna, because I'm human, just wanna doing something that she could take offense to, right? Now how she twists that in a narrative, that's a whole different thing. But like literally, like at times there's innuendos, suggestions, and because of the fact that we like to play in those ambiguities, those things could get a little foggy, especially in a narcissistic fog, and it could turn into like a lot of sketchy areas, which is why you shouldn't flirt, right? And so it might seem harmless, and we like the aspect of flirting, right? But at the end of the day, like you're not gonna like to hear this. It should be reserved for your partner, right? And so your partner, in her sick, twisted way, she's gonna shame you for not having any experience, right? And so she wants someone with experience, but then she's gonna get mad that you got experience because that experience, not for nothing, is also gonna ruin you. It's also why dads get mad about certain things that their daughters like might subject themselves to when they don't listen to them because they're dad and they know that they got their best interests, right? And so it's a weird thing, right? So I flipped it because I was just talking about that dynamic between, you know what I mean? But it's not to confuse it. It's to also help you identify the roles, right? That in this dysphoria is trying to convolute when that shouldn't be the case because in our human nature it boils down to those two rudiments, those fundamentals, those two truths which help us get here even when you throw IVF into the equation. And so if you have a more pro IVF, I have to say it that way because like I'm scrolling within these 2 weeks, like, all right, what should I talk about? And then boom, I want to read in something about like some pro lifer was interviewing somebody about like abortion, a pro-abortion, and it got wound up getting physical. And you see the video of the person, the interviewer, literally getting attacked, right? And so that wasn't fair. But then again, like when these ideologies contend, like especially when we lose our civility, it goes down to our also our 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 our, our inner nature, right? And so our inner nature, in that innate ability to also be innocent, there's a little bit of that childish aspect of it that could be destructive, and this is why we need our parents, right? And so it's important that you understand that because if you don't understand it, you're gonna hate your parents. So if you hate your parents, you're always gonna have this issue with God, and ultimately, He's everybody's parent, right? And He's everybody's parent because He put the first two parents on the planet. We didn't come from apes. Then to go back and try to explain that, it's like you're still not even eating milk. You're probably on something synthetic. I don't know what you on, but I already covered this between formula and breast milk. And so, we gotta understand these gender roles. We gotta understand that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, right? And before a man becomes a man, he's a boy. Before a woman becomes a woman, she's a girl. And because they have a way of accelerating that process, A lot of times they try to skip from being young ladies to grown women, and in the process, a lot of danger, you know, takes place on their psyche and their way of thinking, and that has a lot to do with the fact that they're susceptible and they're more vulnerable, and they like to think otherwise, but it's that same false thinking that you know in a way creates life and destroys life. And this is why it's important that they have a healthy understanding of the two, because this is where it allows for the masculine energy to do what the masculine energy was designed to do. And so I have to say it like that because I didn't even cover every aspect of everything that I might have considered from my opponent, right? And so literally, like, I'm not even telling you how I'm receiving this consciousness and my dominant way of thinking, right? And so I'm also considering like the underlying attack from the ideologies that I'm subject to, that I'm around, that surrounds me, and not just me, but just like are prevalent, right? And so I recognize that as I like did not fail to admit, omit, there's some females that will get offended by the word or the terminology female, right? And yet, if you're someone who understands construct, regardless if you're a male or female, or whatever you want to consider yourself, right? Just going down to the building blocks of life, which is Legos, but at a deeper conversation would be what? Atoms and molecules, right? And so, even deeper than that, right? But let's not just like get to that point of just like microcosm of it. Let's just think about, just be present and think, I when we were children, right? And so the book that I'm reading, it winds up like in a humorous way bringing up the Sandlot, right? So it goes on talking about the Sandlot, right? And so the Sandlot is something that should be in mostly everybody's childhood. It's kind of ubiquitous. So the book refers to it, right? It references it because that's an understanding that we should understand. But it also has a way of references in the fact that it's also a movie. And so this was something that I remember from my childhood, right? And so it has a way of being like fictional and non-fictional because it's also like a figment of your imagination. Like, it's almost like, when you think about a house, you think everybody has a house, but I grew up in a city, and in the city, like, there's for most of my life, I grew up in a building, so I don't know what it feels like to have a house. I don't know what it feels like to have a house with a chimney. Now, I do know what it feels like to have a house simply because my dad wound up purchasing a house, and I wound up referring and speaking about that many years ago. But for the most part, my story is very relatable with many, especially immigrants that migrated to like a place like New York and wound up growing up in places of urban settings, and just know what it feels like to be in urban setting after urban setting after urban setting. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking about a movie that I vaguely remember at the moment, and it has to do. It was like some kind of sci-fi comedy. Really, it's not Men in Black, but it had to do with like a resident part of the city that some old grandparents had, right? And so, it was being, and the movie didn't speak of gentrification, but it was being developed, and so like you had a lot of like urban high rises and building offices that were being constructed around it, and they had to kind of like somehow like purchase that land so they could continue with their reconfiguration and design for the city. And so, like literally, like on a cellular level, our cells behave that way, and so there's very different many roles, right? But in real life, there's also many different roles to real life too, and there's many variables that are introduced into the equation, right? And so, um, when it comes to like ideologies and these subtle attacks, right? And so I feel like at my best capacity, I was I was working at a certain kind of level, but certain like certain like if depending on how my perspective or my understanding of it, how I process it, like I could be a victim or I could be somebody that like 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 jumps over these hurdles or goes over them or just finds a way to break through them, right? And so in a way that they're necessary, right? And so in a way they could be described as chaos, right? And in a way I was talking about Isaac Asimov, and in a way it's somehow this chaos winds up bringing forth life, right? And so when it comes to these ideologies, like I gotta remind you of these things. Now I'm interacting with this female. I don't know much about this female. Since I interacted with her, I haven't seen her since, and I don't know if that's good or worse or whatever. But the case is, the thing about it, like I can't rush to any judgment about the female. I don't want to talk about the female, but it's weird because I'm really just talking about my life, and at the same time, within my life, I recognize many synchronicities or many things that I could just recognize as uncanny or coincidences, and I don't think too many things are by chance. So I was talking about probability, and I don't know what was the probability that I was supposed to interact with her on that day or any other day or whatever the case may be, and I don't know what the probability is that I could accurately assess the person that's in front of me, and vice versa, right? And so, even if I'm thinking like that, is that misogynistic of me thinking like that? Wow, right? And so I'm in my male energy, right? And so I understand that there's this thing where people like to talk about the divine masculine and the divine feminine and all this other. I don't want to call it nonsense, but I'm gonna call it nonsense because people confuse it and don't fully understand it, right? And so I've gone on to explain that, and even when you don't talk about it in those terms, when you're talking about it from a biological standpoint, right? Biology doesn't say that we're equal. Biology can't come up with this whole um, affirmative action and protesting. And so, in our brute sense of it, an atheist might introduce that, and then this is where, even though I don't want to admit that there's a God, I'm gonna believe that this is a better way of thinking about it because ultimately this is just human nature. So if you could take over, just take over. And it ain't till that person realizes that even Alexander the Great, as much as he conquered, ultimately he went down to the dust. So the Bible speaks of ashes to ashes and dust to dust. So we return back to the dust, and man was made out of dust. And so that dust is also described as that mal. And that mal, not the Mars, but that clay, right, that forms us is in the hands of God, and God shapes us and molds us, right? And so there's so many departments, right? And there's so many variants, right? And there's so many things that you go through that kind of like could bury you, persecute you, or exalt you, right? And so there's been experiences that are tailored to us, experiences that literally like have shaped and molded us, and some have claimed victim to them, and some have triumphed over them, right? And so, you know, you like to think that you're the author of your story, and in so many ways you are, and in so many ways life will try to tell you otherwise, right? And so the same book tells you about God, and the same book tells you that we're like clay in His hands, right? And the best kind of clay is the most malleable, right? And so, how do we become malleable, right? And so, like literally, like it's also important that you understand that there's two kingdoms and there's many different understandings, but ultimately you can't slave for two masters. And so one is gonna impose on you and encroach upon you, and the other one is gonna do the same, but it's gonna do the same for his will. And you gotta ask yourself which is the greater will, right? And you might not know, and you might selfishly under carnal um tendencies or just weaknesses, like like the proclivity I have you naturally to feed that lesser wolf and indulge in that magic and not
reference to the like Most High and the power that is reserved for Him, and take matters into your own hands. And so some of us are, you know, aligned with God, and others of us are at war with God. And like literally, like it ain't till you understand your relationship with God that you're gonna understand what side are you on, right? And even in that, you might go back and forth because you have your flesh to contend with, and you have your inner spirit, and your inner spirit is always gonna want to align itself with God, which is why in your quiet time, this is when you have a lot of those revelations. You might recognize that you're closer to God, or even in your quiet time, you might recognize like where is God, and while you're with the crowd, you might be distracted, so you might not recognize where God is, and even while you're with the crowd, you might recognize that God is with you, because you might be going up against the crowd, or you might also recognize that like the crowd is with you, but not because of you, but because of God. And so the fact of the matter is, like all of this turns into discernment, right? And many of us don't understand what side of we're on, right? And so it's important that you recognize, like, you hold every thought captive to Christ, right? And when you do that, that aligns you more with Christ. And so now you start to recognize why friendship with the world is enmity with God. But it's a deeper conversation, right? It's one that I'm not trying to fuse like science fiction and pop culture together, but it's one that when I think about, cause like I gotta say it like this, right? So like when I think about when I think about family, I think about my little one, right? Like literally, like I gotta think about my highest self, right? And so like I think about my experiences, right, and what allows me to be a good parent, right? Um, and so I think about the times where I was my best self, right? I think about cause like literally like yo, I don't know if I was like somehow like, cause it's important that you be mindful what you consume, right, or what you inherit and what you allow in your inner sphere, right? And so I'm not sure, but the best way I'm gonna describe it is that I heard some murmuring, right? And so I've been telling you about Moses. I heard some murmuring, and I ain't want none of that to get into my spirit. And sometimes people could be overly critical, and they could talk about you, right? And they could criticize you, and they could go do that to other people, but they won't necessarily give you the tools, or they won't tell you exactly. Or when they do, they'll have the most wackest approach of how they go telling you, and then it turns into something that, even though they might have meant well, they wind up doing it in a way where it just made more damage, and like it wasn't beneficial. You understand what I'm saying? And so like life is complex because like you'll have certain people in your life, and the way they fulfill that role could be like, you know, not just instrumental, but could be like propelling and powerful, and it could also be a detriment, right? And so, like, I'm not sure if I was listening to some murmuring, and I'm like hearing some criticisms, and some of it is like not even true, and I'm saying to myself, like, I well, let's go back in time when I'm 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 like I'm in the gym, right? I'm not in this location, but I'm in another location, and like that's a sensitive thing for some people, right? And like especially like overweight people, right? But not just overweight people, right? And so like literally like obesity is a thing. You know about the sad American diet and all of that stuff, right? You hear about our kids and them being diagnosed with like early diabetes and pre-diabetes and all these things, right? And it has to do with the diets and what we consume, right? And you're more susceptible when you live in like urban environments, man, and just like to a lot about what I speak of, right, and like my ideologies and just things that what I overall might have been speaking of and speaking into existence and things that I've been thinking about for a long time, right? And so like I mentioned I mentioned Campesino, right? And so like I know about urban settings all my life, right? But in my time, like through different experiences, like I've also experienced it, right? And so like it's something that like a city slicker might not want to like enjoy some of the comforts or some of the pleasantries or some of the things that come or the inconveniences that come with like that kind of setting, that kind of way of life. You know what I mean? Like, she said, "Hey," I said, "Meet me at the bar." The fucking bar stinks like shit. Who the fuck wanna go to the fucking bar? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? The fucking bar is, it's disgusting. It stinks in there. You know what I'm saying? But she said, "Hey," and so like, literally, like, um, yeah. So like, bear with me. I might just might have to ease my way out of this. Like, you know what I mean? Like, nah. I'm gonna just get right to it, right? So like, um, she she said, "Hey," right? And so like, but the fact of the matter is, like, even in the urban setting, like, you know what I'm saying? You get to like some places, like, I mean, it's not even to be biased or prejudice or, you know what I mean? You know the difference between affluence and the ghetto, right? And so, like, you know what I mean? Like, you more privileged, right? That affords you a certain kind of experience, right? And so, like, I mean, a man travels abroad of much, right? And so, like, he learns, you know what I'm saying? And so, like, still being first generation, and it's not that that give me some kind of advantage because, like, there's people well deserved of reparations, yet they didn't get their 40 acres of the mule. Yet Article 15, right? Those farmers, what happened to them, right? You know what I'm saying? And so, like, like you think about the overall history of it, right? And so, like not for nothing, like you know, and it's like it's a contentious thing because it's like when I started my family, like in my ignorance, bro, like if I talk about it, then I'm gonna be too hard on her, especially like as I've grown as a mature man. Like I recognize my incompetence and my young my young boyness and not my having the maturity to have the proper um what I'm saying, like, understanding. And it's important that I say it like that. And the reason being is because a lot of times we put women on a pedestal and we call them the gatekeepers. When in reality, like, you know what I mean? Like, and I have to say it like this because, like, yo, there's so much weird shit about this world. There's people I genuinely love, right? And, like, I love them for different reasons, right? And so, like, my love is not a perverted kind of love, right? It comes from certain experiences and just like those moments, right? And so like, yo, my boy, like he was like, he cause like he knows the like the female drama, like you know what I mean, that we had to deal with like in our life, and like I always stick to like can't live with him, can't live without him, right? So like he was like, there's times where like we bonded, but like not off of that type of trauma and shit, but like we relating. We got different stories and experiences, but we know the madness and the chaos that come with these women, right? And we love our children, we fathers and shit like that, right? And so like he's like, who's been carrying them longer? Because a lot of times like they like to throw in our face that oh, I carried you 9 months, and it gets into all levels of unhealthy narcissism, bro. So unhealthy that it's almost just as unhealthy as a pro-abortion bitch. You know what I'm saying? Like, but they don't recognize the opposite end of the spectrum of the shit, and they feel like it's almost like the hell is paved on a highway of good intentions and shit like that, right? They like it get to a point where they get too extreme with the shit, right? They get too extreme with the shit, right? And so you gotta know how to kind of like how to like kind of like smooth with this shit, right? And so like it's not just smooth, right? But like just have like the right balance, right? The right type of balance, right? So I'm hop over here, I'm gonna hop over there, but I'm gonna get back to it. Hopefully we don't lose sight, right? And so she she wearing this yellow shirt, right? Now going back to the divine energies, right? The masculine and the feminine. I don't know her, and I don't want to be judgy, right? But she giving me some type of energy that I could really say, but then I'm so humble, but then at the same time I don't want to be like I told you so, and then at the same time I don't want to. It's like I want to shoot the last shot, but I don't want to shoot the last shot, right? And so it's like literally like she giving me some kind of energy that I can't tell, right? And so like maybe I'm giving some her energy some kind of offensive, right? And so I don't know, but like maybe she tolerating me, maybe I'm tolerating her, or whatever the case is. But we in each other's like magnetic field, right? A little bit, and I gotta say it like that because I'm speaking on this shit, but she nowhere near in front of me right now. You know what I'm saying? I'm not in front of her. You know what I mean? I'm not at the gym right now, and more importantly, like it's still kind of in a weird way, it still kind of like holds true, right? And so that was some days ago, like into last week or whatever week it was, right? Because I'm talking about this 2 week span, right? And so we not into the next week, right? That would be 3 weeks, right? We not into that quite yet, right? And so like literally like I'm not even necessarily getting the Mac mode. I'm not even necessarily being extra playful. I'm just being myself, and at the same time, like I'm trying to enjoy the moment. So by me saying I'm trying to enjoy the moment, I ain't ruining it and say, well, y'all should be working out with a dude. Like I'm not gonna get stronger working out with a female, right? I even remember myself saying like, yo, I might have ignorantly said some stupid shit like, yo, I hate when I see dudes working out with females, right? And so it's like I might have said that some way, right? I don't know if I said that, but like at the same time, here I'm working with a female, right? And so at some point, I put my foot in my mouth and I said something like jokingly. She kind of like took a little serious, but she gave me a little pass. So like she tolerated me, but at the same time, like I ain't gonna get cocky and say she liked me, but I ain't gonna I ain't gonna like. Why should I not think that way about myself, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like that's what I'm saying. Like, and to think like that is like it's not a crime, but then again, like I'm not being conceited, right? And so the thing about it is like I could be overly critical of myself and say like, yo, but she mad young, right? So she say her age, and I'm like, damn, yo, I gotta feel like some. Am I, am I, am I like low base nature? I'm thinking to myself like, damn, bro, I gotta be some good nookie, but like at the same time, like I know the elasticity of nookie. I know the elasticity of nookie to the point where it's like around that same time, like I was thinking about older and younger women, like, and what would be the like I don't want to say like the advantages, but like obviously the pros and not whatnot. You know what I'm saying? And so like the spiritual warfare take place in the background, but like we ain't gonna focus on that too crazy, right? Or too tough, right? And so like in the middle of that is the subtle attacks, right? So she got a certain kind of energy, but then my energy is not feeling insecure to the point where it's over trying to compensate. I'm just being myself. I'm telling you, and so like I'm trying to enjoy the moment and just take the day at a time because I got a lot of things that like not for nothing. Like I don't understand it, and like I could get worked up about, and this whole victim mentality could start taking shape. That for me, like I remember having a if we're gonna really have a tantrum discussion, remember really having a like a moment where I kind of like spazzed out and I wound up like literally like just like and then to hear how people spoke about it, like try to make me feel like I was immature, try to gaslight me and hold me in a certain kind of light in a narrative that I certainly just best way to describe it, La Belle, right? And so it's like when you think about the grand schemes of it all, right? And so like I don't want to get that psychoanalyze and analyze it, because then I'm gonna start to like demonize and criminalize people, right? And so like just being a kid about it, right? And so that allows me to like love, right? And so like God is love, right? But more importantly, like like what happened with Christ, right? He so God loved the world so much, like he gave his only begotten son, right? So he loved you and each and every one of us, right? And as disciples, and not even as disciples, no one who doesn't understand love has not met God, right? And so when it comes to like love, like and all different kind of ways we want to be loved, right? Now she giving me some kind of energy like she love females, right? But like at the same time, like that energy is not so dominant. It's almost like it underlies the fact that she loved or she likes dude too, but she can't process that or hasn't processed that in her life properly. And it's for various different reasons. And it probably got to do with that whole dynamic with the parent. And so, at some point in our conversation, in our interaction, I mentioned having that. And what was the probability of me bringing that up? What was the probability of me having that discussion? Why didn't I just work out with her? I've worked out with other people, and I haven't said much. Matter of fact, that same day, or maybe even the day after, or the day before, I worked out with somebody, and maybe I was too talkative, but simply I introduced myself and I asked them if I could work with them. That same time that I was in the gym yesterday, the other day, somebody asked me, and it all boils down to approach. Maybe my approach was whack, or maybe I treat people the way I want to be treated. And so, someone introduced me to they workout. I wasn't too friendly at that point, but it's not to say that I'm not friendly. I just didn't take them up on that workout simply because I already had worked that machine. And so I over tend to think things, but I'm back to with the trainer, right? Well, I'm telling you about when I was with the trainer, right? So I found it odd because, like, I think that's the first time that I noticed a trainer there, right? So now I'm there with her, right? And so, um, she giving me some kind of like vibe, right? And I'm not trying to prejudge. I'm not trying to be judgy, and I'm just trying to be myself. And so, if I'm prejudgy, right? Before I say anything else, because a lot of times people don't like when you judge, and I'm in a judge-free zone, right? And so that extends beyond the gym, right? Right? I'm in a judge-free zone that extends beyond the gym. So like I'm in the gym, right? And um in the process, like literally like even if she is giving me that energy, I'm not rushing to any kind of judgment thinking, all right, well, any kind of thing that I might say that might sound judgy. If I'm interpreting her incorrectly, because sometimes you could judge accurately, and sometimes you could misjudge. You understand what I'm saying? So before I say anything that might, and it depends on a very important thing, an insecurity, how deep that wound or that insecurity is, how deep that is to the point where she could take offense to what I say, right? Now, some people don't think before they speak, right? And so we don't always think before we speak. And so, we could wind up saying something, put our foot in our mouth from time to time, right? And so we shouldn't say everything that we think neither, right? So I'm picking up on her energy. I'm thinking this is what it could be, but I ain't give it really much thought. And so at some point I wound up saying something, and at the same time, I was just being myself, and I wasn't trying to overcompensate, and maybe we was just tolerating each other, right? Because I didn't have to work out with her, and she didn't have to work me out. I mean, there's a gym, and so the probability of her working out anybody increases with the fact if the gym has people in it or not. You know what I'm saying? Now, if the gym is full and she can't get somebody to work out with, I mean that's a whole nother conversation, right? Um, but she's there to train, so I don't know what it is to be a trainer, but I will factor like um scheduling because literally like I used to schedule and I know that if you're an active trainer, you're gonna have a schedule, and so while I never trained anybody, I understand where the two work hand in hand. They complement each other. They need each other. So if you're really active and you got a active schedule, you're gonna be known as a busy trainer or whatever the case is. So I'm working with her at that moment because I want to get bigger. But if I'm thinking really like whatever kind of level bias that I might have, well, my bias is that women don't know anything. Women are inferior. They're the weaker vessel, right? Because that's what it says in the Bible. Then I shouldn't be working out with her, right? Or I'm thinking to myself, I can't work with her. What's she gonna teach me, right? And then some big brolic chick comes in there and kicks my ass, right? And so like I don't think like that, right? And so this whole divine feminine, divine masculine thing offers a deeper conversation and what it really is. And then when you get to that, it has to transcend the carnal. And then when you realize that the carnal is not just the actual flesh, but it could also be a state of a mind, right? And so when it comes back to the conversation of our higher nature and our lower nature and what serves us, right? And then you delve into that whole light and that like like obscurity, right? Of things, right? And so the lower nature, right? And so like it's not just light and dark because it transcends that because it speaks to something that is intangible and then when it's intangible it's hard to measure but the best way you can measure it, it has to do with frequencies and so now you add sound into the equation and so if I tell you that let there be light was enunciated and pronounced before you actually saw light, how could that be? Especially when your carnal mind and your atheistic, whether it be pride or whether it be ignorance or whether it just be the stain, your atheistic ideologies draw you to believe that seeing is believing. And so now faith is something that if I tried to not even explain, but if I try to lean on, you're gonna try to tell me that it doesn't exist because it's illogical. Yet somehow something like a miracle is in your vocabulary. Somehow you won't say that magic is not real, and so you might argue that magic is real, and yet we get back to the loopy conversation, right? And so this is why we never left Egypt, right? And so what took place in Egypt? Because obviously something great took place in Egypt. We know this because we still can't explain the construction of the pyramids. We can only speculate. Only speculate. Only speculate. When we're talking about facts, you want to disregard the Bible. Yet the Bible does not disregard Egypt. And repetitively, or I don't want to say repetitively, I mean, when it comes to numbers, they even have a chapter that's dedicated to numbers. And in that same chapter, it takes place in Egypt. And so coincidences, what do they lend themselves to? Probability? Probability, what do they lend themselves to? Algorithms? Are algorithms something that, in a poetic way, in my ignorance, might suggest blow like the wind to and fro? Because, yes, you could control the wind, right? I mean, for instance, a vacuum sucks it, right? It's directional. And so maybe some of your school of thought is in a vacuum, or maybe it's in an echo chamber. And yet, somehow, although we could funnel it in a way where we hold every thought captive to Christ, we recognize that if we inverse that, we could gather those same leaves that fall, right? When it's too much to rake, right? And we just want to get to it, right? Because of technology, we could order or purchase a home blower from Home Depot, right? And gather all of those up and then rake them up and put them in a big bag. And next thing you know, we don't have all these leaves on the lawn, right? And yet God's word still remains. So do I believe in God? Absolutely. God is a personal thing. How could it not be a personal thing? Yet he tells us where there's two or three or more gathered in his name, right? And so this is why fellowship is important, right? The thing about it is, because the wheat and the tear grow together, they don't all gather in his same name. They don't all gather in his same name. And so, in this whole matrix, right? We're going on almost 3 hours, right? In this whole matrix, right? Um, I I've been telling you about many of not just, well, for me, the relevance of the Bible, right? Because that's a personal thing. So you might not hold the Bible in high regard, but I definitely recognize it as the Word of God, right? I definitely recognize it as it being alive and exerting power, right? I recognize that. I might even give you various testimonies of that. And there's many eyewitnesses that recognize the same, right? And so while this is taking place, I'm reading about the accounts of eyewitnesses that took place centuries before mine. And so when I have that interpolate, not even that, like inner and understanding of it, it even brings more truth about why Isaiah chapter 40 verse 8 is real, why the Bible is alive and exerts power, right? And it's alive in real time because it tells me to pray without ceasing. And when I explain to you what that means to me and how we breathe, and we breathe, right? Because the moment our heart stops, like we're liable, right, to what, to die, right? Right? Our heart is what keeps us alive, and figuratively, like we also have a figurative heart, right? And depending on how optimal is working, it could keep us alive or it could bring destruction, which could eliminate our lives and not just our lives, but those, right? And because we have to contend with something that God placed inside of us, right? He placed eternity in each and every one of us. Even in the person that goes and in an ill-fated way commits suicide. That's what Judas did, right? Even, and not to say that every person that commits suicide is a Judas. That's not up for me to say, although that's a strong argument to make. I will tell you that in that outcome, even in that outcome, what happens is that person contends with the fact that they betrayed some aspect of a truth and some level of unworthiness and not wanting to deal with that, right? Day after day after day. Because see, what God placed in each and every one is He placed eternity. And so for the person who commits suicide, they may not want to face that feeling of that awakening of that truth that they recognized in what led them to that final moment of calamity. And so the fact of the matter is life could be very arduous, right? It could be a disaster for some, right? And God in his compassion, he wound up scribing. And I have to say that, and I pointedly say that because I go back to the book, I go back to the little dig, right? And I didn't take it as a dig. I'm playfully reminding you so that this is not a boring sermon, right? I'm playfully reminding you of such. Why? Simply because I don't want to let this seem like a bitter harangue or at the very least a disinterested lecture that you cannot miss. But in your disrespect and in your insolence, grapple with, right? On this holy day, right? And not to be holier than thou, but to give reverence where reverence is due. And so that dig reminds me of that book, right? And here it is. I tell you about that yellow shirt, and on that same day I was getting vitamin C. Wow, in the library. Oh no, that wasn't vitamin C. It was vitamin D. And maybe I meant something about vitamin C that in my nasty mind I probably shouldn't talk about, right? So I won't get into the crevices of things, right? The deep dark corners of life, right? I won't burrow into that hole, right? Right? Why should I beat a dead horse? But it's important that I beat a dead horse, right? Right? Horses are powerful, right? And in this spiritual warfare, I remind you, right? I remind you of these horses that in reality, those of those times who had the horses were the most powerful in war. And here it is, Pharaoh with his chariots had to contend with the meekest man on earth. Those were not my words. And yet, in your disrespect, you might even want to challenge me and say that they're not the word of God. And so Christ had a way of speaking and teaching with authority that was duly noted. And I have to say that poignantly because this is historical fact. And so take this little dig at me. And in my insecurity, right, that I could easily let turn into a wound. Why would I want to let it turn into a wound? Now, not to confuse a wound with a womb. But then again, a woman's narcissistic ways in her emotion, in her temper, tantric, topology, might telepathically come with her bullshit, right? So I got this shorty in front of me, right? And so my dominant, I'm getting my playful way, you know what I'm saying? And so like I don't want to offend her, right? And so it's like I'm saying to myself, bro, like this is why as men, like God called us to lead, right? And so like here's the thing, like you know what I'm saying, like I get frustrated because like I'm not where I want to be in life, right? And so if I explain that to you, like you don't try to tell me some other bullshit, right? So you can't tell me some shit because you know I'm gonna come with the facts, and so like you gonna try to gaslight me. And in your gaslighting, I recognize not the truth, but I recognize something that maybe you might unknowingly might be trying to show me. But the thing about it is, whose consciousness is more important? And so when it comes to level of communication, some people want outright communication, and when it comes to other communication, some people they might not want it so blunt, right? They might not want it so raw, right? And so um, I gotta interject these into the whole conversation, right? Because like you know, my carnal fucking mind. I'm gonna get into my carnal mind. Now, I might be blasphemous, and I pray it's not blasphemous because the thing about it is, like Paul said, you shouldn't even hint, but I understand the people that I gotta deal with, the stiff necked people, right? And so when I don't get into this understanding of it, then it turns into my silence, and then my silence allows for a whole nother narrative to take place, and that narrative winds up misleading people. And then when I speak, people recognize it, and then it's just like, that's why they hang on to every word, and it really shouldn't be the case. And at the same time, like it's also the reality of it, right? And so that leads to like a whole bunch of contentions because like even within Christ's disciples, like they argued amongst themselves, like who was like greater among them, right? And so in the ideology that I somewhat kind of adopted, I recognize that Christ was the greatest teacher and the greatest man, right? The greatest teacher. I recognize that he's the greatest teacher. Now, a lot of people, a lot of ideologies come up against the ideologies that I was taught. But I know, and a lot of times when I hear their challenges, they inform a lot of the people as to, not to say that they're not misinforming people. So I always go back to what I said. Like, I don't think nobody has the right 100% ideology until Christ come back, right? But I also recognize the same thing a lot of other people recognize, the same thing a lot of angels been peering into, right? So there's things that of the spiritual that we innately design, and this is why many of us are curious and we're drawn to it, right? And so many in good conscience and in bad conscience, in good faith and in bad faith, they practice the occult, the esoteric, and they may not know, and God knows this, and He warns us against this. But some people are so convinced, and they're convinced in either or way, right? And so some of that has to do with the veil blinding others. So those who make the argument against everything that is of God and should reverence God, and why we should hold Him in the most sacred and like really sanctify and minister to Him and hold Him in high regard and recognize that He's the Almighty, and like God is omniscient and omnipresent. Like it's because they're blinded behind Satan's veil, and so they adopt the ideology of what's being taught on that side of things, right? And they're wholeheartedly convinced. And at one point, and this is where the Bible was so like it's such a, I don't want to say it like this because I don't want to pervert it, but it's such a mind fuck. Like, because how is it that Paul was on that other side of the veil, right? And so he went hard when he was on that camp. He went hard. He was persecuting those. Remember, he was there when Stephen got persecuted. He gave the command, right? But it ain't until he had that interaction, right, with the divine, with Christ himself, that all of that changed his trajectory, and he wasn't on that side of the veil anymore. And he had the true enlightenment and the true awakening, and was the greatest proponent for the New Testament. Not the only, because obviously a lot has to do with the gospel and the accounts of Christ and what took place in the revelations of John and the gospels And so literally like it's important, man. Like we going on 3 hours, a little over, and so I covered a lot of ground, and a lot of it's interlacing. That's for you to unpack. But I'm like getting to the things that are very consequential and very important, right? And so, like I'm supposed to be held in some kind of regard, right? And a lot of it has to do with like narratives and all kind of like like delusions, and I don't really know how to like really explain it because I don't listen to everything. I don't subscribe to everything. Some of the things, most of the majority are projections, right? And so I'm dealing with the joint in front of me, and I ain't holler at the joint in the library. And maybe it's not because it's my time, but then every once in a while, like my dominant frame of mind comes in. It comes into that whole conversation of like, all right, well, why do you need to have? Well, yes, important that you have these resources and these finances, for a woman, but then so yo, this joint like she cute, like you know what I mean, like she aging well too, right? So like she having a whole dynamic and a Middle Eastern joint, type of what I'm saying, the type of thing that man, like your mind starts to man, you start thinking about this, and then like there's no way escaping it. A lot of it's like so I do and I don't take a lot of this coaching and dating advice, like going back to what I was saying, not to be conceited, but like in my dominant frame of mind, like I I mentioned my whole virginity thing like at a late stage in life. But by the time I got to my first girlfriend, yo, it's something that I'm not proud of, but it's just something that I understood. Yo, when my girl pissed me off, like I put it on timeout. Like I loved the fuck out of her, but I didn't know that at the time. Like this is what is going through my mind at that time, right? I'm putting on timeout because she's really irritating and annoying the fuck out of me, right? And she kind of being a distraction, right? She not understanding that shit, and she thinking in her mind like I'm probably talking and entertaining other girls. Me, I'm still innocent and I'm still a goody two shoes. So like none of that shit came into my mind. Like I'm gonna be honest with you, I wasn't even trying to like play her, but she got all of this stupid ideology that she already absorbed from other interactions, and so this taints our relationship because it takes our understanding and it taints our experience, right? Which is why it's important that we don't have these tainted experiences before we come into the one that could potentially be the one we're supposed to be with, because it could mess things up. And that's just like it could be hyperbole, it could be like hypothesis, it could be like some imaginary shit. Like you're supposed to be with who you're supposed to be with, so like that goes into probability, goes into a whole lot of conversations that supersede the fact that life is supposed to be lived, right? And so you live and you learn. That's my understanding of it, right? But some people, a lot of people don't think like that, right? And so she think like that in a way, and so she step into the equation. I don't know these things, right? So I'm not judging her, but I ain't telling her like, yo, listen, I don't got all of that experience. Like I'm a virgin. I ain't telling all of that shit, right? And so now I always say this shit like sex makes people stupid, right? So I'm going through all of that shit, yo. I'm in that good old nookie, like I'm going through all of those feel good things that feel good, but then like, and so love is a thing, and then just like not understanding some of the other elements she introduced, that chaos that she introducing into the equation. But like I know I love her, so I'm dealing with like other shit because she got family shit that she dealing with too. You know what I'm saying? And so like as a man, you thinking like you wanna alleviate. Like I'm still of that traditional thought. Like you wanna, you know what I'm saying? Make sure she good. Like you know what I mean? Like how she gonna call you a man if you can't solve her problems type of shit, or solve some other problems or help alleviate some of the problems. So this is just me thinking like it's not like my dad spoke to me and sat me down and taught me this shit. Like it's sort of ways that I just like picked up as a man, right? And just knew like just even from recognizing like females that were single, that grew up single, like they had males in their life that helped them with certain situations. You know what I mean? So it might look like a hoe from your perspective, but it's also her having like some understanding, like, all right, well, I don't got a man to do this for me, and I need a man to do this for me. And that's a whole different era from the era where we in now, where it's like, men ain't shit, I don't need no man. You know what I'm saying? But it's still the same ideology of using a man, right? But at least those women knew the benefits and like the positives of having a man, as opposed to having this toxic masculinity where they think that they're better than a man and they should replace a man, and that a man has no need or no use. That's the current state of affairs, and that's just absolute bullshit. And me, as a man, I gotta contend with that shit, right? And so, if I'm dealing with like, and y'all know some of the reasons why I got fired, so I'm not even gonna talk about that. But I will just say that to segue into the fact of the matter within this 2 week gap, right? Why I wanted to go to Edison, right? Why like gaming is a thing for me, right? And so hopefully I segue properly, right? Because if I'm radiating with you, then it's supposed to look like how the fuck I conceived it, right? And so going back to how my homeboy said it, like we carry them way longer than like they do. And so yeah, you might have some of the resources to give birth to my idea, but just because you are somewhat of the conduit doesn't mean that you own the shit and that you should take over with your stupid ass ideologies because you fucking it up like a single parent mom. And so you give a single parent moms a bad look, and they not all bad, but they have to deal with bad circumstances that sometimes have them looking like, you know, like fucked up. And as the man, that's the man's role. But then again, there's this attack on masculinity where it's like, ah, fuck, that shit get convoluted, and then it winds up being an attack on the nuclear family. And so you thinking as I hate men, but it's really wherever you thinking that is the source of I hate humanity. And so I gotta say that because like I'm doing some background work, so I'm trying to like, I learn things at different paces, right? And I learned things through experiences too, and people try to dictate certain experiences in my life and how I'm supposed to feel and what experiences I'm supposed to have and not have and things like that. People really try to play God in my life in subtle different ways, right? Now, I as a parent, if I even in my humility, because we supposed to be humble, in my humility, if I even like contend with that in a respectful way and recognize like damn, like I will, damn, even as a parent I might feel like I should have some kind of way or dictate how my kid comes out, and the things that they should be subject to, or the things that they want to have as interests and pursue, and just basically control their life, right? And so I'm not a control freak, but I've been accused of that probably for the longest time by people trying to gaslight me and trying to undermine me, right? And so I recognize a level of control that I'm definitely not intolerant to, and a level of control where I shouldn't be tolerant at all. And so I recognize where it's healthy, and that's where I'll interject, you know, a mentor. But then again, I also recognize where people might feel like they play God, or they might try to lord over you, and that could be a detriment. And so when it comes to being a parent, there's a terminology called helicoptering, right? And so as a parent, I don't think I helicoptered too many times, but I think it's important at times to helicopter, right? Now this stage, like the dynamic in the relationship between my child and myself is you know, I don't want to say non-existent because I still pray, and that's pretty much the only lifeline. So I gotta kind of continue to interject God, and so my kid might not necessarily believe in God, or might not believe in God like how I believe in, or might believe in a false God, or might subscribe to another God or a false God. And so literally, like their ideologies are gonna contend with mine, and so how I upbring them is gonna be different from how they might want to be upbring, right? And so now I'm approaching 4 hours, and I need to speed this up, but I'm trying to cover a whole lot of ground, right? And so I gotta go back to Onan, right? And I gotta contend, right, as a man, and that's kind of another way that you're defined as a man, right? But it's not really, because it goes back down to the spirit, and I'll break that down in a whole nother time. But it's not so much about breaking it down. Like literally, Paul, he contended with the spirit and he plummeted his body. And so while going to the gym, it's important, right? And Christ talked about dying to ourselves and denying ourselves, what Paul spoke on them. And so I'm before this female, and I'm saying to myself, like it's important that I enjoy my day, and if I enjoy my day, if I enjoy my day, yo, my bad. I got this like noise in the background. I have no control over that, and there's various reasons why I don't have control over it, and I don't know what is being said in that, but you might pick up on some of that, and you might speak multiple languages, and so you might be contended with what I'm speaking and what you're hearing. And I don't know if they have anything to do with each other than the fact that they're taking place at the same time. And so I'm trying to convey a message to you, right? And so there's always a lot of things that we gotta contend with. And so I'm in the gym, and this ideology may be something that I'm contending with outright, or something that I'm contending with subtly, right? And so I'm not paying any frame of mind other than, I will, you know what? Let me be myself. Like if anything, I probably shouldn't interact with this and just do my own workout. But then that's gonna show a level of not being humble. That's gonna show a level of being misogynistic, and maybe I should be misogynistic. And this is where this realization came into my mind, and then it was further reinforced with the fact that, oh yeah, we carry them way longer than they carry them, and because I realized that at some point in the conversation of our interaction, I wound up having somewhat of this conversation that I'm having with you, right? And I'm like, all right, well, if you want to evolve, it's like, all right, well, it started off, or at what point was it always a feminist ideology? Because if it was always a feminist ideology, like literally, like it was a lot of masculine things that took place, and in a lot of ways, females, for lack of a better term, or for what people want to, propel as the female sexual revolution, or just females needing to be liberated, like that happened in the Garden of Eden in subtle ways without people even noticing it. And this is where democracy takes place, and all other ideologies, right? That you got to contend with. That fast forward into now, I'm just going to the gym, and if I go to the gym, I mean, this person's there to train. They don't got nobody to train, so maybe there's other tasks that this person can handle. I'm also going there to try to maximize my gym experience and get the most results that I could get results from, right? And so if I do that, then you know what? Here I got somebody training me, and I might get an effective workout, and I might yield some results. But if I think with my biases, then you know what? I'm thinking this person is a feminist. And even if I think this person is a feminist, maybe I'm also recognizing that as a Christian, or maybe just as a man. Maybe I should contend with that, but there's subtle ways where I contend with it, where I'm not trying to dominate it, but I'm still trying to let her and show her and lead her perhaps, and let her know why this way of thinking is probably better than her way of thinking. And so it's nothing against the divine feminine, but it's just that the masculine has a way of leading, right? And so because females of late, they've acquired a lot of masculine traits. You can't necessarily fight fire with fire, which is why, in a lot of ways, um, like we as men, we don't like to soft fight. And then what they'll try to do in their fucked up reverse psychology, they'll try to tell you, "Oh, you can't deal with a powerful woman," or my power intimidates you. Powerful women intimidate you. Like as a woman, let's not forget that you're a woman first, so you should lead with your femininity, but now you're leading with your masculinity, and you're telling me that there's nothing wrong with that, but then you won't recognize that that's toxic masculinity, especially the fact that you're um you're trying to exude that. And so I'm dealing with this female, and she's not necessarily exuding that, even though there might be hints of that, right? And they're just subtle hints, a pinch of salt, a grain of salt, if you will, right? So you don't have to take into consideration anything that I just finished saying, because I don't know anything about this person other than that simple interaction that I had with them, right? And maybe that simple interaction might be somewhat um, indoctrinated by uh, misunderstandings or experiences that I previously had, right? And so you got to contend with different understandings, right? And so, you know, one of them is gonna try to dominate, right? And it might do that overtly or subtly or whatever the case may be. And so, if I'm supposed to be the best version of myself, and if there's a healthy version of myself that's the best version of myself, then maybe like it's important that I understand who I am as an individual, right? And that's important because it's poignant because there's many aspects about me understanding about who I am. Once again, I go back to the part of the conversation that even is in the Bible when they say, I don't know what they say of me. That's what the Son of Man was saying. And I'm not saying I'm a prophet. I'm not saying that I'm the Son of Man. I'm not saying anything other than probably what I wrote while I was in the psych ward, right? And so, either way, the fact of the matter is, like I love, right, my people, right, and it's a healthy kind of love, right, and it's not a love where it's like I'm gonna lie to you, right, and so I gotta talk about my baby moms, right, and so a reason I gotta talk about my baby moms because like while I was in psych ward, I was talking about um yes, like there's certain things that there's no way around the discussion I had to bring up, right? And so it's not to talk about in a disparaging way, but like literally like like I had to bring in the fact that the women are the gatekeepers, right? And so they think because they bring forth life that they should dictate life, right? And so like it's funny because we 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 carry the source of life. And then this is when I recognize what I'm about to say right now, right? So I'm in the gym, right? And I could be for some people, people work out for the most vainest things. Some people will try to cover it and try to say, "Oh, yo," because like I want to be healthy, but for some people, they really want to still be youthful and they want to be strong and they want to carry that into the sex or carry that into bedroom, right? So there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I mean, it could get into unhealthy levels, and I could explain that, but I don't want to explain that because I want to deal with the more healthier aspects of sex because God created sex. He created sex, and sex creates both men and women, right? Because it creates girls and boys, right? Right? And so like sex is important and sex is a beautiful thing. And going back to Moses, Moses was a beautiful child, right? And so she recognized, Pharaoh's daughter recognized how beautiful he was, right? But it goes on to say that he had God's glory on his face. And it says that a few times because it says that when he's a baby and it says that when he comes down from the mountain, right? They noticed that after him spending time with God, that his face was shiny, right? And so I'm not trying to dirty the conversation up or the discourse, but like people trying to really like confuse the two and demonize people, right? And so I had a certain ideology and a certain perspective to be my best self, right? And at that point, I probably should have been in a committed relationship, but I couldn't because of certain factors that I gotta just kind of like somehow try to understand, but they don't make any valid points and like literally like just like, for what? Oh, because your ideology is based off of what? Ego and pride? And that's what you're trying to confuse me of having? And so I don't want to let a vain word come out of my mouth. And yet I might hint to some things that I probably shouldn't have in clean speech, which disqualifies me as a preacher. So I don't like to say that I'm a preacher And I wouldn't call myself a teacher because I really don't know shit. But I just learned something the other day that I taught myself. But then you trying to say that I taught myself the wrong way, so you take a dig at me. And it's not a minor dig because the fact of the matter is, it's so many people that saw 550 that literally I should just be chilling. And so earlier today, somebody asked me how I was doing. I said I'm chill, right? But it's easy to talk about myself, but like I don't want to point fingers. And so I'm in the gym, right? And so I gotta tell you because that same day I went to the library, right? And so in my ego and my pride, I might have got lost track, but I didn't lose track. And so somehow I want to go on a flushing, and then like I wound up having to deal with some kind of like system, and I didn't go to the gym, and I'm not sure if I'm confusing the 2 weeks that I was in, because I'm not saying that's not the reason why I didn't go to the gym last time, but I know that also interfered why I didn't go to the gym. And so this last time, in my ego and my pride, I probably would have felt bad that I didn't do one more set. And so the person that I was working out with, like literally, like maybe I bowed out graciously, or maybe I in my humility didn't want to outshine a master, or maybe I was just too weak, or maybe I'm admitting that I was too weak, or maybe it was a little bit of all of that. But either way, I gave my best effort and I did it for God. And so literally like I kept that in mind, so I didn't push any further. And then I wound up doing something else. And then I remember saying something about I don't want nobody to accuse me of ego lifting, but I don't want to accuse anybody of being in their ego and their pride. But I just did. But hold up, maybe what I was trying to say and not accuse them, because I was talking about the accuser of the brethren. But that means that we shouldn't rush to judgment. But then I was talking about judgment, and then I was saying, and what First Corinthians 6, right, chapter 6, verse what 6 through 9, right? But we should be able to, oh, before we even get there, because you're not even washed yet, right? And you don't serve the God as your mission said, right? Your open mission said you don't serve the same God, right? And so having that inner understanding, at the end of the day, I know where that comes from, right? So as I read the book, I also know that just like they were taught by Bill, I'm gonna teach them. Oh no, I'm not gonna teach them, because then I would be me and my ego, my pride, or that would be me having some kind of self dignity about myself, or that would be me having illusions of grandeur, or that would be me and my narcissism, or that would be me and my convoluted dissonance, or whatever psychiatric disorder you might come up with, and say that I'm disillusioned and I'm making assertions, and I think that I'm having imposter syndrome because I think I'm Moses and I'm trying to lead a bunch of stiff necked people that are really not stiff necked. And why am I trying to do that? And I remind you about Scott Dudley, and before I even get there, I gotta remind you about Ella Beats, and before I even get there, I gotta remind you that I made a song called "Give Him the Glory," and was I talking about myself? But then you're gonna remind me about the time that I was in the subway, and about the time I had an account, and I said, um, or the handle was Mr. Last Laugh. Then you're gonna get mad that I said that on the train, and then you're gonna say, and then you're gonna accuse me of saying that I think that I'm God, or thinking that I'm God. But then you're gonna forget about something that my mother said when I was a little kid. But I was telling you about what Jesus said when he was a little kid. But I'm not Jesus though. And so when Jesus' mother found him, and I'm like, damn, yo, I don't mean to be blasphemous, because some people respect the Virgin Mary, right? I don't mean so to be so blasphemous, or maybe in my machismo, I'm like, how could you be such a stupid bitch? You don't even know where your kid is at. and what that grown man told her when he saw her. Or he was just a child when he said, I must tend to my father's business. But hold up, you want to tell me about the divine feminine? And so you can't be a mother without somebody being a father. And so Kiani want to come at me in a funny way because I'm not her father, but then she can't forget. But then she probably won't admit that she was there when I sent her mother a Mother's Day gift on Father's Day. But I'm not a mother, but I'm a father. And the only reason I'm a father is because she's a mother. But hold up, I made her my mother. Hold up. How stupid could I be? I was just being disrespectful, calling or saying somebody and saying, how could you be such a stupid bitch? You don't know where your son is at. But how could you be such a stupid nigga and wife up somebody else's mother? Oh, hold up. So that's where Kiani comes into the equation, right? And so she comes into the equation because I'm a father. So because she's in the equation, because I'm a father and I'm in the equation, but you trying to take me out of the equation, you trying to tell me that I got no say in my kid's life. But hold up, the only reason why I'm sending your mother, and the only reason why she's a mother is because I'm a father. But hold up, you want to disregard the fact that I'm a father, but hold up, you only want to disregard the fact that I'm a father because. So let's not go there, right? But hold up, you was there because I'm a father, and so I sent that to your mother, the same one that I might have inadvertently said, "Oh yo, but you a stupid nigga. How could you wife that?" And she's already somebody else's mother. So even though she's my first baby mother, she's somebody else's second baby's mother. Oh, so that's where you come into the equation, right? And so I was talking about siblings earlier, right? And so you being the first sibling, you ain't had nobody to teach you no kind of ways. And you being the first sibling, guess what? Your little sister picked up on some ways about you that you don't like. And so now you want to take it out on your sister, but she's showing you who you are. And so now you want to tell me about a temper tantrum that happened last week, and I ain't teach you shit. And something about me recognizes that you was trying to teach me something. And something about me and my misogynistic ways, because I might have heard somebody say something about La India. And so it's like, that might kind of like ruffle some feathers. And it don't matter if you probably Puerto Rican or if you Mayan or Aztec or Taino or whatever the fuck. Or you could be East Indian, West Indian. Maybe you feel some fucking kind of way. Maybe you just a red fucking man. But if you're a red man, then you're a white man. But hold up, the white man is the devil. And so hold up, the white man wiped out who? But surely the white man can't be the devil because I know some motherfucking black devils. No way! Que carajo upset your streams when lava flows Galapagos? Who dropped the most charcoal roast? ¿Y qué pasó? And so I should be eating off of that, right? Pero dile la verdad, ho. Y todavía tú estás guapo. And so I'm chilling and I'm saying to myself, but yo, like, there's a lot of things in my life that I don't understand. I ain't trying to be better about nothing, so I gotta give y'all some content. And so, like, there's a lot of ideologies out there, and you don't know me or you want to contend with me, then you don't understand my yada 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 y qué sé yo no qué y yo y esto el otro and right and so like in my household I speak English and Spanish, so I went outside and I with my very addictive ways, like you know I go light up, get my mind right, then I come back and I hit you with this content Ya vamos casi 4 horas, right? And so I was debating about this for like 2 weeks, and I'm talking in circles. I go on so many tangents and loop de loops, and todavía tú no sabes, y todavía tú no me entiendes, and your ways are not my ways, y tú sigo con lo tuyo, y yo sigo con lo mío, right? And this is what it is, and it's like two different kingdoms, right? And so for me to be the best self, like not for nothing, like I also gotta contend with the enemy within myself, right? I also gotta contend with that, right? Not only do I got the enemy within myself, I gotta deal with the accuser of the brethren, right? Right? I gotta deal with the greater overall enemy, right? Our enemy, the same enemy that you and me got, even though you think I'm your enemy, right? That same enemy, that same taskmaster, right? You wanna say, oh, the Bible promotes slavery. Yo, that shit hit me a certain kind of way when I read this scripture, right? So he talking about, I'm gonna paraphrase this, right? He talking about you and me, but he talking about the slave, right? Serving the master, right? And he just finished coming from outside and doing the master's work. And instead of him like cleaning himself up and bathing himself and getting something to eat after working hard, this nigga just busted his ass outside, right? He just went outside, probably in the fucking dead smack of the sun in the heat, cause he got a master. So like, ain't nothing right about slavery and shit like that, according to you, right? And so, like, the master, right? The master is like a fucking racist piece of shit, right? And so he hates him, but in a narcissistic dynamic, he loves his slave at the same fucking time, right? Because his slave makes his life convenient, right? And as long as his slave understand his role and fulfill his role, then he has a great fucking life, right? And he gets to exude that great life by also exuding his power over his fucking slave. And sometimes he might appreciate his slave, and other times he might treat him like a piece of shit, right? And in this sick, weird fucking way, a woman's psyche is like that, right? It's just so fucking sick. But we're not gonna delve into that. We're just dealing with the greater overall humanity. But where do women come from? Oh, hold up, I gotta put something there first. Oh shit, damn. And so it's something that hates humans because literally like it was created to serve us, and it recognizes that we ain't nothing but defects. It recognizes that we ain't nothing but dirt and we shouldn't be worshipped. We ain't shit. And so it hates us. And in a very cunning way, it establishes that in the Garden of Eden. And we read about this in Genesis. And so its hate is so deep rooted that it hates God creation, and it wants to supplant God's creation, and it thinks that it can create a better creation, but it hates to admit that whatever creation it creates is built off of the creation that God created. So this is why I tell you that sex is God's pattern, and it knew that, and the only way to infiltrate that was in the Garden of Eden, and it had to do that before Adam and Eve eloped, cause it knew that that code was gonna create life. And so this is why it feels like hell on this earth, because it created a world where Adam surrendered his dominion and surrendered it to someone who hates you and me. And it ain't gonna be nobody that looks like you and me that's gonna save us. It's gonna be somebody that was created in the image of you and me that's gonna have a greater love than the hate that created. You get what I'm trying to say. And so that's that sick dynamic, that cystic, twisted dynamic that I was just speaking of, right? And so I'm trying to draw some of it to a close and then reset, right? And there's a lot that I covered, right? And so you got these people that hate life and they're trying to project this nonsense, and they won't let me be me. And then by the time they recognize that they should, they still try to do little manipulative things to kind of like disregard and undermine like not just my vision. You understand what I'm saying? The vision that God gave me. And so, it's been a very frustrating thing along the way because I should be a lot more further. And then there's people that try to say you are where you are supposed to be. And so, me taking into consideration, I offer you this, and hopefully it's edifying. Hopefully, we delve into streams of consciousness that perhaps maybe in the background. Not to say that they're novel and they're things that you've never probably considered in your quiet time. I'm sure certainly because they're part of the human experience. And how I deliver it might not necessarily be unique, but at the same time, it is I. And I try to reduce myself in that capacity when I deliver these messages and not do these on my own volition. And so the frequency is erratic or could be sporadic at best. And so there's no telling. And it brought me to this moment. And so, I'm recording this in the middle of my chaos, right? And so I mentioned the whole India thing, right? And in the process, that's a deep conversation, and maybe there's some aspect of my shadow work that I gotta contend when it comes with that, and there's various reasons, and maybe I'll delve into them. And honestly, I would love to delve into them, and I mean that in the most healthiest way. But I also know it's shadow work, and so it could be a little, you know, disruptive. But I feel like I have to contend with that because I have to deal with the original source of it, right? And so these are things that I've been absolutely, not I, but Yah has been absolutely right on. And so, like, why I'm still on task because, like, literally, like, I was talking about Telemi and I was talking about, what guided, um, I briefly spoke on it. I've spoken about it many, many times previously, but that solar system, our solar system, our star system. I even spoke on that yesterday and what the watchtower represent, right, for sailors at sea, right. And so it was the mechanism or tool or actual edifice where light was emitted that would allow the sailors to, in the nighttime especially, navigate once they were able to distinguish the coast and know that that's where the light was being emitted from. And so, this forms a light, a pathway. God's word is that, and I wholeheartedly believe that. And so, um, you know, not to delve into the carnality and the carnal mind, but these are things that we still got to deal with. And in the accusations of things, I offered you clarity, and then I got the lead list to try to come cunningly, come and try to like present problems and all kind of weird dynamics in my life, right? And be an accuser of the brethren, right? And try to thwart, God's blessings in my life and send all kind of manners of, just little traps that thank God, if not for God, like similar to Joseph, like, God has delivered me from. But in reality, like similar to Abraham, like these things didn't happen overnight, man. And so the promise was something that like literally like what's so different between now and then if God promised me something individually and maybe you don't because you're atheist you don't have an so you would never be able to understand why I believe in God and how I had a conversation and why I could believe what God told me. You could never ever believe that because you don't believe in God and you willfully don't believe in God, and that's why I said what I said. Now there's some people that ignorantly do that, but then there's people that are so intelligent that at that point they know it's a decision. And so, like, at the end of the day, there's stronger forces, and that has to deal with the fucking environment, which has to deal with the veil and being behind the veil. Because the environment might not necessarily be the physical place, it could be the mental state. And so, the heart posture as well. And so, I gotta kind of like bring this closer to what I mean like a more sizable appetite, but it is a healthy diet that hopefully some of y'all been able to consume and in that process become edified, um, and so yeah, I gotta contend with that, and I want to contend with it in a healthy way. Now, just like I said, when I was either on the elliptical or the treadmill, like um, does that make you covetous? Like he said, don't covet the next man's wife, right? And so like I'm not even on that, and there's reasons why I shouldn't be on that. And then there's people that want to punish me because I'm not still on that. And then because if I'm on that, that brings up their pride and their ego. Just to sum it up, you understand what I'm saying? And that delves into some of the temper tantrum from last week, and then that covers a whole lot of like things that we could really like if we had to contend with. And why not? Because I speak about Job, and in the case of Job, like this is something where Satan was brought forth, right? And so people want to go out of their way to demonize somebody, right? Where a case was brought forth before the multitude of the sons of God, right? So just like there's a legal system down here and a legal system up there, and you have these legalists or whatever, like legally, and you already know like the legalities of certain things that I'm involved in, and certain things that could easily should win, right? But because that reveals the corruption of things and people not wanting me to win, and me trying to have some grace and some other understanding about the fact of the matter, I recognize it in a greater way, but I'm still waiting for my promises, certainly. And so the fact of the matter is, we're not going to delve into that aspect of it, but, in the process of it, we understand that, that, with, um, like, like, just like we have like a court system that we got to deal with over here. Um, when you want to, as an atheist, say that God doesn't exist, and then I pointedly bring out why the atheist still has to contend with morality, right? Because even the atheist is gonna find himself getting into a subcategory of is there a binary and no binary, right? And even the atheist is gonna not want to be reduced to a brute, right? And even the atheist is gonna say, no, we need civility, right? And then this is where morality, at the root of it, has some kind of, well, the word exists for a reason. Even if I want to dismiss it and reduce it as to like some mere, oh well, the fact that you want to have morality means you have this disillusion of a dystopia. Oh no, 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 hold up, not a dystopia, a utopia. And the fact of the matter at the root of it is your fucking dark heart rather live in a dystopia because that allows you to rule. And so you're narcissistic to the point where you rather fuck everything up. And here, this is where pride comes in. And this is where we see the first of it showcasing who? An entity called Satan. And so, yes, narcissism has a lot to do with the satanic and demonic, right? And so, if you don't properly diagnose it psychologically, then you've over in your pseudoscience will oversight and look and miss the fact that you have to deal with this spiritually because what you're going to uncover is supernatural, right? And so you somehow open Pandora's box. And so ultimately, you go back to the source and you recognize, I will, even if Egypt was the most advanced, even if this proves this underground structure that Egypt was the most advanced, and your Bible is just some allegorical fairy tale shit, and I don't have to adopt that, but I'll give you some kind of credit when it comes to Moses, but I'm not religious, so don't come talking to me about that stuff. And so I got a whole bunch of books, right? I got a whole bunch of books that I could do what? I could subscribe to. And so I'm in this theology, philosophy, and all of that. And I come up with this book about leadership. And that's a whole other conversation. I alluded to some of that conversation, right? And the rules of Roberts and the decorum, right? And so I'm still reading the book, and that's the dig that I was referring to. So I keep digging, right? And so maybe I'm digging my grave, even though I was trying to just stay the hell out of shit, right? And so, yeah, yo, so like, like yesterday, like I delved into some of my carnality a little bit, but not too really, cause like, like the reason why I started this, right? So that same person kind of inspired me, right? But there was a lot of things that I was trying to look at, and then so it's not to have any retaliatory. So I didn't bother even consuming his. So he can't even feel slighted because I didn't even bother consuming it because like I said, I'm not building my ministry based off of looking at stuff and scouring the internet to try to like, all right, well, this is what it is, and now I'm gonna have rebuttals at whoever got contentions with me and this, that, and the third. Not saying he got one or whatever the case may be. I don't even want to step into none of this stupid shit, these YouTube streets and whatnot. But I recognize that's how it gets into. And so then I got into this whole thing with the psychologist a little bit. I get into it, and then I gotta remind you of my carnal mind. And in my carnal mind, like I figure like it's something that she wanna show me, it's something that she's kinda in her female nature engaging in an argument with me. And it's like how do I proceed? How do I engage? Do I look at this the wrong way? I could clearly see like she's in the wrong way a little bit, but like women don't like to be corrected. But if you correct them the right way, and when it comes to correcting them the right way, like we could delve into levels of being perverted, but I don't want to delve into that because a little bit of leaven ferments the whole entire batch. But then again, when you there's such a thing as the rod of correction, and that rod of correction, like when we thinking about it in good terms, is important. And so you spare not the rod where you spoil the child. And so the thing about it is, where do children come from, right? So there's a little bit of dirtiness that we're gonna have to touch on. And so some of that is evoked from the psychologist, and something about that is like this doesn't only get aroused when it comes to her, but yeah, there's some of that that has been there for a little bit and for a while, and so I don't want to say names, but it was kind of there, and I was fighting it when it came to um, doctor, and it was two doctors. I had two psychologists that I had contend to, and like literally like it was some real roles in my mind that started to kind of like arouse me, and I had to kind of behave, and I didn't want to delve into them, and I did, and then I started to realize like the deviancy of it, and I started to realize everything that they accused me of. Like there it is. It's like nah, I don't want that, and I'm not trying to act holier than thou because I've been recognized all of that, and so there's healthy levels of it, and then there's levels where it absolutely should not be tolerated because that's where it leads to, and it's just it's just wrong. And there's that level of distorting it where you try to make it permissible, and that should never be the case. And so I'm contending with this, and I'm going back and forth. Like so, they mentioned like India, and then you ain't already know I got this other thing going on with Coco, right? And so like I love my people, and then they never want it, and they find it. So it's like damn, it's like I mentioned something, and they recognize some shit, and they feel offended. But then they got in their pride and they swag, they like their old ego too. And so each nation got their own pride and they swag, and they happy to represent themselves, right? And so they try to shit on me and try to say, hey, what did get? And then they recognize like, oh shit, like why? So like you fucking with like nah, like so it's like this love hate thing. Like yo, some of them, especially the ones that grew up over here, they recognize that shit because they know what it is to be first generation and then grow up over here. And then some of them, de lo mío, they recognize that shit también. And so it's like then it gets real celoso, and then you already know that passion and that stickiness. So it's like, yo, I want to stick on it. And it's like you feel slighted, but like, pero tú me entonces qué de cuándo esto comenzó, right? And so I'm reading the book, right, from Marcus Garvey, right, and in that it it has like levels of like psychology that he delves into, right, before the Unia, right, and it has to deal with that relationship between mother and child, particularly mother and son, right? And so I kind of alluded to some of that, right? And I had to, not to delve and distort things, right? But talking about Leviticus. And so we're going to pause so we don't run out of too much storage, and we're able to still post this. And we're going to stop this. Hopefully, I got most of the audio, and we're going to come back to it. I'm going to leave it for like that for now, but come back with more edifying discussions and streams of thought just bear with me. In the meantime, in between time, chewing that for now.